The kingdom did not fear war. It feared Duke Cadric Ashford. When he walked into a room, conversations died mid-sentence. When he smiled, men checked their pockets for what they might lose. The Northern Territories belonged to him not through inheritance alone, but through the systematic dismantling of anyone foolish enough to challenge his authority. He bankrupted rival houses before breakfast. He crushed rebellions before they drew breath. And when lesser nobles whispered about the monster who ruled from Blackmoor Keep, they did so behind locked doors with the curtains drawn because Cadric had destroyed men for less than gossip. Then they threw her into the mud, and everything changed. Stay with me. This is where the monster learns to bleed. The rain came down in sheets the night they ruined Elara Thorne. Cadric's carriage rolled through the merchant district toward the Thorne estate, just as the first screams echoed from the courtyard. His driver pulled his horses short. Through the rain-streaked window, Cadric watched a scene that would have been beneath his notice on any other night. A young woman knelt in the mud. Her silk gown, probably worth more than most servants earned in a year, dragged through the filth like a funeral shroud. Her dark hair hung in wet ropes across her face. She wasn't crying. That caught his attention first. Women in her position usually wept, begged, performed their helplessness like a rehearsed dance. This one just knelt there, shaking with something that looked more like rage than despair. Above her on the manor steps, an older woman in emerald velvet held court before a crowd of servants and minor nobility who'd gathered like carrion birds to witness the spectacle. Torches hissed in the rain. The woman's voice carried across the courtyard with practiced theatrical precision. Seducer, fortune hunter. My stepdaughter threw herself at Lord Pembroke like a common whore, and now his wife lies ill from the scandal while this creature— Cadric stopped listening. He'd seen this play before. Different actors, same script. The younger woman threatened someone's position, so they destroyed her reputation before she could become dangerous. Simple. Efficient. He might have admired the strategy if it weren't so crude. His driver glanced back. Your Grace, shall we continue? Cadric studied the woman in the mud. She'd lifted her head now, and staring at her stepmother with an expression that made something cold shift in his chest. Not broken, not defeated, calculating. No, he said quietly. Stop here. He stepped from the carriage into the rain without bothering with a cloak. Water soaked through his black coat immediately, but Cadric barely noticed. He walked toward the courtyard with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, a weapon choosing its moment. The crowd noticed him before the stepmother did. Conversation stuttered to silence. A servant dropped something that shattered on the cobblestones. The woman in emerald turned, her rehearsed outrage faltering as she recognized the Duke of Blackmoor standing in her courtyard, like death itself had accepted a dinner invitation. Your Grace. She executed a curtsy that would have been flawless if her hands weren't shaking. We did not expect— This is a private family matter. Cadric ignored her entirely. He walked past the gawking servants, past the delighted nobles who'd come to watch a woman's life end, straight to where Elara Thorne knelt in the mud. Rain ran down his face. His boots splashed through puddles that reflected torchlight like pools of fire. He stopped in front of her. She looked up slowly. Her eyes were the color of smoke and just as hard to hold. For a moment they stared at each other while the rain hammered down and the entire courtyard held its breath. Cadric saw everything in that look. The fury, the betrayal, the sharp intelligence already calculating how to survive this. She was dangerous. He liked that. Stand up, he said. Elara's jaw tightened. I'm quite comfortable here in the filth where my family believes I belong. A laugh tried to escape his throat. He crushed it. Then you're a fool. Stand up or stay there and let them finish destroying you. Choose quickly. Why would you care either way? I don't. Cadric extended his hand anyway. But I dislike waste, and you're being wasted on these people. The stepmother found her voice behind him. Your Grace, I must protest. This woman has committed grievous acts against— Be quiet. 2 words. Barely a whisper. But the woman's mouth snapped shut like he'd struck her. Elara stared at his outstretched hand for 3 seconds that felt like hours. Cadric could see her mind working, weighing risks, calculating odds, survival against dignity, freedom against whatever trap she thought he represented. Then she placed her mud-stained hand in his. The moment her fingers closed around his, something shifted in Cadric's chest. Not affection. Nothing so weak. More like recognition. Like finding a weapon you didn't know you needed. He pulled her to her feet. She stood nearly eye level with him in her ruined shoes, trembling from cold and rage and the massive weight of her entire world collapsing. "You belong to me now," he said. Not a question. Not a request. A statement of fact delivered in the same tone he used to claim territories. Alara's eyes flashed. "I belong to no one." "We'll discuss that in the carriage." He turned toward his driver, still holding her hand like she might bolt if he released her. She probably would. Another reason to keep holding on. The stepmother surged forward, desperation making her bold. "Your Grace, you cannot simply take her. There are proprieties, legal considerations." Cadric glanced back over his shoulder. The rain ran down his face, plastering his black hair against his skull. In the torchlight, his eyes looked like chips of ice. "Send the legal considerations to Blackmore," he said softly. "I'll have my solicitors feed them to the dogs." Then he guided Alara toward the carriage while the courtyard descended into shocked silence behind them. She didn't speak during the ride. Cadric sat across from her in the dark carriage, watching water drip from her hair onto the leather seats. She'd wrapped her arms around herself, shivering violently, but her face remained carefully blank. Locked down. Every emotion sealed behind walls he recognized because he'd built the same ones. "You're in shock," he observed. "I'm calculating." "Calculating what?" "Which danger you represent." Alara's smoke-gray eyes found his in the darkness. "Whether you're worse than what I left behind." Cadric leaned back, genuinely interested now. Most women he'd rescued, and God knew there'd been few enough, responded with gratitude or terror. This one looked at him like a problem to solve. "I'm definitely worse," he said, "but at least I'm honest about it. Are you? Would you prefer pretty lies?" "I'd prefer to know what you want from me." Rain hammered against the carriage roof. Outside, thunder rolled across the Capitol like artillery fire. Cadric studied the woman across from him, this creature they'd thrown away, and tried to articulate something he barely understood himself. "I don't know yet," he admitted. That seemed to surprise her. Most men know exactly what they want from women in my position. Most men are tediously predictable. Cadric's fingers drummed against his knee, a rare tell that he was thinking. "Tell me what actually happened, not the performance they staged tonight. The truth." Alara laughed, but it sounded like breaking glass. "Why would you believe me over them?" "Because liars are always louder." He tilted his head. "And you barely said anything at all." Silence stretched between them. The carriage swayed through turns. Alara's shivering began to subside, though whether from warmth or sheer will, Cadric couldn't tell. "My stepmother wants my inheritance," she said finally. "My mother's family controlled trade routes through the eastern provinces. When Mother died, everything came to me. Father remarried within 6 months to a woman who thought she'd gain control of those assets through him. She thought wrong. The contracts were ironclad, so she needed to destroy me instead." Alara's voice remained flat, clinical, like she was describing a military campaign rather than her own annihilation. "Lord Pembroke was her creature. She arranged for us to be alone together, spread rumors, then orchestrated tonight's spectacle. By morning, the scandal will have reached every noble house in the kingdom. I'll be unmarriageable, politically toxic. Father will be pressured to disinherit me to salvage the family name." Cadric felt a cold smile touch his lips. "Elegant. Is that admiration?" "For the strategy, yes. For the execution, no. Too theatrical. If you're going to destroy someone, do it quietly." He paused. "Though I suppose your stepmother needed witnesses." "She needed everyone to see me ruined." Alara's hands clenched in her lap. "So no one would question when I disappear." Disappear? Convents are convenient places to send disgraced daughters, especially convents far from the capital where no one asks questions about women who arrive and never leave. Thunder cracked overhead. The carriage lurched through a pothole. Cadric processed this information with the same methodical precision he brought to military strategy. "She underestimated you," he said. "Everyone does. And now you're in my carriage, dripping mud on my seats, trusting I won't simply hand you back to them." Alara met his gaze without flinching. "Trust implies I had a choice. I'm gambling that even a monster's protection is preferable to certain destruction." "Monster." Cadric tasted the word. "Is that what they call me?" "Among other things." "What do you call me?" She considered this with unnerving seriousness. "A weapon. Possibly the only weapon capable of countering my stepmother's attack." So you're using me. We're using each other. Don't pretend you intervened from altruism. Alara leaned forward slightly. You saw an opportunity. You always do. That's what makes you dangerous. Kedrick felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not anger, not even irritation. Something closer to satisfaction. This woman, half drowned and completely ruined, saw him clearly and didn't bother lying about it. Refreshing. What do you know about Blackmore? He asked. It's a fortress carved into the northern cliffs, supposedly impregnable. You rule the northern territories from there with sufficient brutality that rebellion is statistically impossible. Statistically impossible? People fear you more than they hate their circumstances. Basic game theory. Kedrick's smile widened. You're educated. My mother believed women should understand power since we're so rarely allowed to hold it. Bitterness crept into Alara's voice. She was unusual that way. She was intelligent. She was dead before her 40th birthday. Intelligence didn't save her. But her daughter survived long enough to kneel in the mud and wait for rescue. Kedrick watched Alara's eyes narrow. That took calculation. You could have begged your father, thrown yourself at your stepmother's feet, played the victim until someone intervened from pity. Pity is worthless. Exactly. He leaned forward until their faces were inches apart. So instead you knelt there like a queen in exile, waiting for someone with actual power to notice. That took nerve. Or desperation. Often the same thing. The carriage began to slow. Through the window, Kedrick could see the lights of Blackmore's outer gates appearing through the rain. Alara followed his gaze, her expression unreadable. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you sleep. Tomorrow we discuss how thoroughly you want your stepmother destroyed. Alara's sharp intake of breath was barely audible. You're offering revenge. I'm offering options. Kedrick settled back against the seat. Revenge, survival, reinvention, perhaps all three. But first you need dry clothes and 12 hours of unconsciousness. You look like death. Flattering. I don't waste time on flattery. The carriage rolled through Blackmore's gates into a courtyard lit by lanterns that swayed in the wind. Servants materialized from the shadows, well-trained enough not to stare at the mud-covered woman the Duke had brought home. Kedrick stepped out first, then extended his hand again. This time Alara took it without hesitation. A small shift, but he noticed. She was adapting, learning the rules of this new game. Good. A stern-faced woman in severe black approached them. Mrs. Thatcher, Blackmore's head housekeeper, had served Kedrick's family for 30 years and possessed the rare ability to intimidate nobles without saying a word. This is Lady Alara Thorne, Kedrick said. She'll be staying in the Rose Suite. See that she has everything she needs. Mrs. Thatcher's expression didn't change. Of course, Your Grace. Shall I send for the physician? Is that necessary? Kedrick glanced at Alara. I'm not injured, Alara said. Just cold. Hot bath, warm food, clean clothes, Mrs. Thatcher decreed. Then bed. You look half drowned, child. Alara bristled at child, but Mrs. Thatcher was already steering her toward the keep with the irresistible force of a woman who'd raised 3 sons and buried 2 husbands. Kedrick watched them disappear into the fortress before turning to his steward. Send word to Greaves, he said, referring to his chief solicitor. I want everything on the Thorne family by morning. Holdings, debts, contracts, scandals. Everything. All of it, Your Grace? Everything. Kedrick started toward his study. And find out which judges owe me favors. We're about to need them. The Rose Suite hadn't been used in years. Alara stood in the center of an enormous bedroom, dominated by a 4-poster bed that could have slept 6 people comfortably. Tapestries depicting hunting scenes covered the walls. A fire roared in a fireplace large enough to roast an ox. Everything spoke of wealth deployed with military efficiency rather than warmth. Like the Duke himself, Mrs. Thatcher supervised 2 maids who filled a copper bathtub with steaming water, while a third laid out nightclothes on the bed. The housekeeper's sharp eyes catalogued every bruise, every scraped knee, every sign of the night's violence. Men, she muttered, always breaking things, never cleaning up after. Alara found herself smiling despite everything. I'm not broken. Didn't say you were. Mrs. Thatcher dismissed the maids with a gesture. But you're damaged. There's a difference. Is there? Broken things stay broken. Damaged things heal. The older woman's expression softened fractionally, though the scars remain. Alara lowered herself into the bath, hissing as hot water found cuts she hadn't known existed. Mrs. Thatcher moved around the room with brisk efficiency, hanging clothes, stoking the fire, creating order from chaos. "You're not afraid of him," Alara observed. "The Duke? Why would I be? Everyone else is." Mrs. Thatcher snorted. "I changed that boy's nappies. Difficult to fear a man whose arse you've wiped." Despite herself, Alara laughed. Actual laughter. It felt foreign after the night she'd endured. He was a difficult child, I imagine. Impossible. But Mrs. Thatcher's voice held something almost fond. Never cried, even as a baby. His mother used to worry he'd been born without feelings. Was he? The housekeeper paused, considering. No, he felt everything. Still does. He just learned early that showing it was dangerous. Alara thought about the Duke's ice chip eyes, his predator's smile, the careful way he measured every word. What made it dangerous? That's his story to tell, if he ever chooses. Mrs. Thatcher moved toward the door. Eat the food on that tray. Sleep until your body forces you awake. Tomorrow is soon enough for whatever comes next. Mousy skates. Mrs. Thatcher? The woman paused in the doorway. Why did he bring me here? I expect he's still figuring that out himself. The housekeeper's stern face cracked into something almost like a smile. The Duke collects broken things. Weapons, armor, people, occasionally. Maybe he saw something in you worth salvaging. Or he's simply adding to his collection. Perhaps, though I've never seen him look at a sword the way he looked at you in that courtyard. Mrs. Thatcher's eyes gleamed with something dangerous. Sleep well, Lady Thorne. Welcome to Blackmoor. Then she was gone. Alara soaked in the bath until the water cooled, washing away mud and blood and the last remnants of her old life. When she finally emerged, she found silk nightclothes laid out beside a tray of bread, cheese, and wine. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing. The bed swallowed her whole. She should have been afraid, should have questioned the Duke's motives, planned her escape, calculated her next move. Instead, exhaustion crashed over her like a physical force. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was how strange it felt to be genuinely safe for the first time in months, even if the safety came from a monster. Kedrick didn't sleep. He spent the night in his study reviewing reports Greaves had compiled on the Thorne family. The documents painted an interesting picture. Alara's mother had indeed controlled significant trade assets, but the legal protections she'd built around her daughter's inheritance were masterworks of contract law. Brilliant woman. The stepmother, one Victoria Thorne née Ashton, came from minor nobility with expensive tastes and shrinking assets. Her marriage to Lord Thorne had been strategic. Her subsequent attempts to access Alara's inheritance through her husband had failed spectacularly, so she defaulted to destruction. Kedrick respected the logic even as he planned to dismantle it. His steward, a thin man named Corvus, who'd served Blackmoor for 20 years, entered without knocking. Privilege of his position. The judges? Kedrick asked without looking up. 3 willing to rule in your favor on any matter you choose. 2 more if we apply sufficient pressure. Define sufficient. Reminders about gambling debts and mistresses, respectively. Elegant. Kedrick set down one report, reached for another. And Lord Pembroke? Married to Lady Constance Ashford, daughter of the Earl of Westmarch. She's currently recovering from a nervous condition at their country estate. How convenient for him. Indeed. Corvus's thin smile was pure malice, though I understand the Earl is quite protective of his daughter's welfare. Kedrick looked up. Are you suggesting we inform the Earl of his son-in-law's activities? I'm suggesting the Earl might be interested to learn that Lord Pembroke's liaison with Lady Alara was staged by Victoria Thorne specifically to create scandal. That his daughter's illness stems from manufactured gossip rather than actual infidelity. But Pembroke still participated willingly, a distinction I'm certain the Earl will appreciate when deciding how thoroughly to destroy his daughter's husband. Kedrick felt his smile return. This was why he kept Corvus. The man thought like a weapon. Send the Earl our regards along with detailed documentation of the conspiracy. Let him handle Pembroke. And the stepmother? Victoria Thorne is mine. Something in his voice made even Corvus pause. The steward had served 3 generations of Ashfords and witnessed countless acts of calculated brutality. But the Duke's tone carried something new, personal. Shall I arrange a meeting? Corvus asked carefully. No, let her enjoy her victory for a few days. Let her think she's won. Cadric's fingers drummed against his desk. Then we'll show her the difference between destroying a reputation and destroying a life. Corvus departed silently. Cadric returned to his reports, but his mind kept drifting to the woman sleeping 3 floors above him. Alara Thorne. Dangerous. Intelligent. Damaged in ways he recognized because he saw them in his own mirror. He should send her away. Even protected by his name, she represented complications he didn't need. Questions from the court. Whispers about the Iron Duke going soft. Potential weaknesses his enemies could exploit. But when he closed his eyes, he saw her kneeling in the mud with rage burning behind smoke-gray eyes, and something in his chest tightened. No, she stayed. At least until he understood what the hell she was doing to his carefully controlled world. Alara woke to sunlight streaming through windows she didn't recognize. Panic surged before memory returned. Blackmore. The Duke. The mud and rain and her stepmother's triumphant face. She sat up slowly, cataloging bruises and aches from the previous night. A knock at the door preceded a young maid entering with the tea service. His Grace requests your presence in the library at your convenience, my lady. Oh, os de os gern. His Grace can request whatever he likes, Alara heard herself say. I'll come down when I'm ready. The maid's eyes widened, but she bobbed a curtsy and fled. Alara immediately regretted her sharpness. The girl was just doing her job. But something about being ordered around in her current state made her spine stiffen. She'd spent 1 night as the Duke's charity case. She wouldn't spend another groveling for his attention. She dressed in clothes laid out for her, simple but well-made, clearly borrowed from someone else's wardrobe, and descended to find the library herself. Blackmore proved to be a labyrinth of stone corridors and fortified passages. Every window was narrow, defensible. Every door was reinforced. The entire fortress felt like a weapon aimed at the world. She found the Duke in a room dominated by floor-to-ceiling bookshelves. He stood by a window overlooking the cliffs, still dressed in black despite the morning sun. He didn't turn when she entered. You told my maid you'd come at your convenience, he said. I did. Most people respond to my summons immediately. I'm not most people. Now he turned. In daylight, Cadric Ashford looked younger than she'd expected. Mid-30s, perhaps, with sharp features and eyes the color of winter storms. Handsome in the way a sword is handsome, beautiful and lethal in equal measure. No, he agreed. You're not. They stared at each other across the library. Alara forced herself not to look away first. That was a game she understood. Power through refusal to flinch. Thank you for last night, she said finally. Don't. Don't thank you? Don't reduce what happened to gratitude. Cadric moved away from the window, circling her like she was a puzzle to solve. You're here because I chose to intervene, not from kindness, not from altruism, because something about watching them destroy you annoyed me. How flattering. I don't do flattery. He stopped in front of her. I do honesty. Can you handle that? Alara lifted her chin. Try me. Your stepmother orchestrated a masterful political assassination. Your reputation is destroyed. Your father will be pressured to disown you. Without my protection, you'll be exiled to some remote convent within a month. Cadric's voice remained clinically precise. You have 3 options. 1, accept that fate and disappear. 2, marry quickly to salvage what remains of your social standing. Or 3, let me use you. Use me how? Eat. As a weapon against your stepmother and everyone who helped her. Alara's pulse quickened. In exchange for what? Your inheritance once we secure it, and your cooperation with whatever political theater I require. You want to own me. I want to employ you. Cadric's smile was pure ice. Ownership implies I care about your consent. Employment means we're both getting something we want. And if I refuse, then I'll have Mrs. Thatcher pack your things and send you wherever you'd like to go with enough money to survive comfortably for a year. But the protection ends. The opportunities end. And your stepmother wins. Thunder rumbled outside despite the clear sky. Alara processed this impossible offer. Trust the monster or face certain destruction alone. Tell me about the weapon, she said. Kadrick's expression shifted. Surprise, quickly masked. Excuse me? You said you'd use me as a weapon. Explain. He studied her for a long moment, then gestured to a chair. Sit. Alara remained standing. I'll stand. Stubborn. Careful. His laugh was brief and sharp. Fine. Your stepmother's attack worked because society believes you're ruined. Scandal has power because people assign it power. But if I publicly claim you under my protection, the scandal becomes something else entirely. It becomes a challenge to your authority. Exactly. Kadrick began pacing, clearly thinking through strategy. Every noble who whispered about your disgrace will have to reconsider their position, because attacking you now means attacking me. And I'm significantly harder to destroy than a lone woman with no family support. Alara felt her mind racing ahead, seeing the implications. But that makes you vulnerable. Your enemies will use me against you. Let them try. You're that confident? I'm that ruthless. He stopped pacing, fixing her with those winter storm eyes. But this only works if you're willing to play your part. Public appearances. Court functions. Letting society see that the disgraced Lady Alara now stands under the protection of the Iron Duke himself. You want to parade me around like a trophy. I want to demonstrate that I don't bow to their rules. Kedrick's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Your stepmother tried to break you using society's weapons. I'm offering you a chance to break her using mine. Silence stretched between them. Outside, waves crashed against Blackmoor's cliffs with relentless force. Alara thought about her stepmother's triumphant face, her father's cowardice, the servants who'd watched her humiliation without intervening. What happens after we destroy her? Alara asked quietly. After? Once my stepmother is ruined and I have my inheritance secured, what happens to me then? Kadrick's expression became unreadable. That depends on what you want. What if I want freedom? Then you'll have earned it. You just let me leave? Why wouldn't I? Because men like you don't release weapons once they've claimed them. Something dark flashed in Kadrick's eyes. For a moment, Alara thought she'd pushed too far. Then his smile returned, colder than before. You're right, he admitted. Men like me usually don't. But perhaps you'll surprise me. Or perhaps you'll surprise yourself. He laughed again, genuine this time. You're either very brave or very stupid. Can't I be both? Most people are. Kedrick extended his hand. Do we have an agreement, boy? Alara stared at his offered hand, remembering how it had felt to take it in the rain, remembering the shift from victim to player, from destroyed to dangerous. She'd been raised to be careful, to avoid risk, to trust safety over opportunity. Her mother would have taken this gamble. Alara clasped his hand. We have an agreement. Kedrick's fingers closed around hers, and for a heartbeat they stood there, connected by a handshake that felt more like a declaration of war. Good, he said quietly, because your stepmother just made a critical mistake. What mistake? She destroyed you publicly. His smile turned predatory, which means I get to resurrect you the same way. The next 3 days passed in a controlled storm. Kadrick deployed his resources with surgical precision. Letters went to every major noble house in the capital, each personally sealed with the Blackmoor crest. The message was simple. Lady Alara Thorne resided at Blackmoor under the Duke's protection, and any slander against her would be considered slander against him. The implications were clear. Meanwhile, Greaves and his team of solicitors began dismantling Victoria Thorne's conspiracy piece by piece. The forged documents, the bribed servants, the carefully constructed timeline of Alara's supposed seduction of Lord Pembroke. Everything unraveled when you pulled the right threads. Alara watched this orchestration from Blackmoor's windows, feeling simultaneously impressed and disturbed. This was power deployed without hesitation, brutal, efficient, terrifying. You're thinking too hard again. She turned to find Kadrick behind her, moving silently as always. The man walked like a predator, weight balanced, ready for violence. I'm thinking about what you're doing to my stepmother, she said. Having second thoughts. No. Alara faced him fully, wondering if I should be more afraid of you. Yes, probably. He joined her at the window, close enough that she could smell rain and steel. But fear is exhausting. Better to accept what I am and work within it. And what are you? A monster who keeps his promises. Kadric glanced at her. I promised to use you as a weapon. I'm keeping that promise. Is that all? What else would there be? Alara couldn't articulate the question forming in her mind. Why did he watch her with that calculating intensity? Why did conversations with him feel like negotiations and challenges in equal measure? Why did standing this close make her pulse race with something that wasn't quite fear? The court will respond tomorrow, Kadric said, apparently changing subjects. Your stepmother's allies will demand an explanation. Some will probably attempt to pressure me into releasing you. And you'll refuse. Of course. This is going to cause problems for you. I've survived worse than gossip. Have you? Alara studied his profile. Or have you just gotten better at pretending it doesn't wound you? His jaw tightened fractionally. A tell. Careful. You said you do honesty. I also do boundaries. Where are yours? Kadric turned to face her fully, and Alara realized she'd miscalculated. He stood too close now, towering over her, all sharp edges and controlled violence. Most women would have stepped back. She held her ground. You want to know my boundaries? His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. Don't mistake professional necessity for personal interest. Don't confuse protection with affection. And don't ever assume you understand me based on 3 days of observation. I wasn't assuming anything. Yes, you were. His eyes searched hers. You were wondering if the monster feels something beyond strategic interest. If there's humanity beneath the armor. Alara's breath caught. Is there? Does it matter? It might. Why? Because I need to know if I can trust you. Kadric laughed, sharp and bitter. Trust? You shouldn't trust me. You should use me exactly the way I'm using you. Mutual exploitation with clear terms. Is that all this is? Yes. You're lying. The words hung between them like drawn blades. Kadric's expression went carefully blank, which Alara had learned meant she'd struck something true. What makes you think that? He asked quietly. Because if this was purely strategic, you would have sent lawyers and letters. You wouldn't have stood in the rain. You wouldn't have brought me here yourself. You wouldn't watch me like I'm a problem you can't solve. Alara stepped closer, reckless now. You're invested beyond strategy, and that terrifies you. You have no idea what terrifies me. Then tell me. For a moment, Kadric looked almost human, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before. Then the shutters came down and the Duke returned. This conversation is over, he said flatly. Running away? Maintaining boundaries. He stepped back, restoring safe distance. Your stepmother's response will arrive tomorrow. Be ready for court the day after. Mrs. Thatcher will arrange appropriate clothing. Then he was gone, leaving Alara alone with her racing pulse and the disturbing realization that she'd somehow gotten under the Iron Duke's armor. And he knew it. Victoria Thorne's response arrived via special courier at dawn. The Duke of Blackmore's protection of my disgraced stepdaughter. Proves his unfitness for political office ran the headline in 3 major newspapers simultaneously. The articles, clearly planted by Victoria's allies, questioned Kadric's judgment and moral character. Corvus brought the papers to breakfast, looking almost amused. The Thorne woman plays aggressively. She's desperate. Kadric scanned the articles with clinical detachment. People only attack this publicly when private pressure has failed. The court is scheduled to convene tomorrow. Several lords have signed a petition demanding your appearance. How many? 15. Names? Corvus rattled off a list of second-tier nobility, all known allies of Victoria Thorne or her family. Kadric committed each name to memory. They'd learn the cost of choosing the wrong side soon enough. Your Grace? A servant appeared in the doorway. Lady Alara is asking to see you. Send her to my study. Alara arrived 10 minutes later wearing a deep blue dress that made her gray eyes look like storm clouds. Someone, probably Mrs. Thatcher, had taught her how to move through Blackmore's halls like she belonged there. Head high, shoulders back, every inch the noblewoman despite her destroyed reputation. Beautiful, Kedrick crushed the thought immediately. You've seen the newspapers, she said without preamble. I have. They're destroying your reputation because of me. My reputation was already destroyed. I'm the Iron Duke. Men fear me. They don't love me. He gestured to a chair. This changes nothing. It changes everything. Alara remained standing, pacing with barely contained energy. They're going to force you to choose between political standing and protecting me. Then I'll choose you. She stopped pacing. Why? Because I said I would. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that matters. Kedrick leaned back in his chair, studying her. I don't break my word. Not for political convenience. Not for social pressure. Not for anything. Even if it costs you power? Especially then. Alara crossed to his desk, bracing her hands against the polished wood, leaning in like she was trying to see through his carefully constructed walls. What are you really doing here, Kedrick? His name in her mouth felt dangerous, intimate. No one called him Kedrick anymore. His Grace, the Duke, the Iron Duke, never his actual name. I'm keeping a promise, he said carefully. Is that all? What do you want me to say? The truth. You can't handle the truth. Try me. Kedrick stood, moving around the desk until they were inches apart. This close, he could see gold flecks in her gray eyes, could smell whatever soap Mrs. Thatcher had provided, could feel the heat coming off her skin. Dangerous. You want the truth? His voice came out rougher than intended. Fine. I intervened because watching them destroy you made me angry in a way I didn't understand. Bringing you here was impulsive, stupid, strategically questionable, and now I'm committed to a course of action that serves no rational purpose except proving I can. Can what? Protect you. The admission felt like losing. Even from yourself. Alara's breath hitched. Why does it matter? I don't know. That scares you. See, everything about you scares me. Silence crashed between them, heavy and electric. Kedrick realized he'd said too much, revealed too much. Given her ammunition she could use against him. But Alara's expression softened. I scare you because you can't control how you react to me. I control everything, except this. There is no this. Liar. Well, Kedrick's hand moved before his brain could stop it, reaching up to touch her face. Just his fingers against her cheek, barely contact, but Alara froze like he'd pressed a blade to her throat. This is a mistake, he whispered. I know. We should maintain boundaries. We should. Neither of them moved. Then Corvus knocked on the door, and the spell shattered. Kedrick stepped back. Alara straightened, professional distance restored. Enter, Kedrick called. His steward appeared with more documents. The Earl of Westmarch sends his regards. Lord Pembroke has been permanently removed from society. Apparently the Earl found Victoria Thorne's conspiracy quite offensive. Excellent. Kedrick forced himself to focus on business. And the petition? The court demands your attendance tomorrow at noon. Then I'll attend. He glanced at Alara. We both will. Corvus's expression remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed. Of course, Your Grace. After the steward departed, Alara spoke quietly. This is it, isn't it? The moment everything changes. Yes. Are you certain this is worth it? Kedrick thought about political capital, strategic alliances, the carefully constructed empire he'd built through years of ruthless calculation. Then he looked at Alara and knew with absolute certainty that he'd burn it all before letting her stepmother win, which was, perhaps, the most terrifying realization of his life. We'll find out tomorrow, he said instead. Court convenes at noon. Wear something that makes you look like a threat. Alara's smile was sharp as broken glass. I thought I already did. The royal court assembled in the grand hall beneath vaulted ceilings and ancient banners representing every noble house in the kingdom. 200 aristocrats filled the space, their whispers creating a low roar like distant thunder. At the center of it all, the king sat on his throne looking profoundly uncomfortable with the situation he'd been forced to address. Kedrick entered through the main doors with Alara on his arm. The whispers died instantly. Every eye in the hall tracked their progress across the polished marble floor. Alara wore midnight blue silk with Blackmore diamonds at her throat, borrowed from the fortress vault, but effective as a territorial claim. She moved like she owned the room, despite every person present knowing about her supposed disgrace. Magnificent. They stopped before the throne. Cadric bowed. Alara curtsied. Perfect courtly protocol deployed as calculated insult. The king spoke first. Duke Ashford, explain your protection of Lady Alara Thorne. With respect, Your Majesty, my protection requires no explanation. Cadric's voice carried across the silent hall. I shelter whom I choose within my own house. Even when doing so creates scandal? This from Lord Merrick, one of Victoria's primary allies. There is no scandal, only malicious gossip deployed as political weapon. Merrick's face reddened. The lady's reputation is being defended by me. Cadric let ice enter his voice. Are you questioning my judgment, Lord Merrick? The nobleman hesitated, clearly calculating odds. Questioning a duke publicly was dangerous. Questioning this duke was suicidal. Before Merrick could respond, another voice cut through the hall. I question more than judgment. Victoria Thorne pushed through the crowd, flanked by supporters. I question the duke's motives. My stepdaughter engaged in immoral behavior. His Grace's protection of her suggests either ignorance or participation in her schemes. Murmurs rippled through the assembled nobles. Victoria had essentially accused Cadric of impropriety. Bold. Stupid. But bold. Alara's fingers tightened on his arm. Cadric covered her hand with his, a gesture half the room noted. Lady Thorne, he said softly. Choose your next words very carefully. I speak only truth. You speak lies. Cadric produced documents from inside his coat, handing them to the king's chamberlain. Forged correspondence, falsified dates, testimony from servants you bribed to place your stepdaughter and Lord Pembroke in compromising positions. All of it detailed here, along with evidence of conspiracy to defraud Lady Alara of her rightful inheritance. Chaos erupted. Victoria's face went white. Her allies began distancing themselves immediately, the way rats flee a sinking ship. The king accepted the documents, reviewing them with growing displeasure. These are lies, Victoria shouted. Fabrications. Us. They're truth. The Earl of Westmarch stepped forward, and the hall went silent again. His daughter's humiliation at Pembroke's hands had made him a dangerous ally. I have independently verified much of this information. The conspiracy against Lady Alara is extensive and documented. Victoria's world collapsed in real time. Her supporters melted away. Victoria's world. The whispers turned from Alara's disgrace to Victoria's crimes. The king's expression suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. But Cadric wasn't finished. He turned to face the assembled court, still holding Alara's hand. Lady Alara Thorne was destroyed by people who feared her intelligence and independence. They used society's rules as weapons because they lacked courage to face her fairly. I protect her not from altruism, but from principle. Because if we allow this, if we permit the systematic destruction of women who threaten comfortable power, then we deserve the sterile, cowardly aristocracy we're becoming. Dead silence. No one spoke. Half the nobles looked shocked. The other half looked terrified that he might target them next. Lady Alara remains under my protection, Cadric continued. Anyone who slanders her slanders me. Anyone who threatens her threatens Blackmore. And anyone who doubts the consequences of either action is welcome to test them. Then he did something that would echo through court politics for years. He raised Alara's hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles in full view of the entire assembly. The declaration couldn't have been clearer if he'd shouted it. Mine. They rode back to Blackmore in silence. The carriage swayed through evening darkness while Alara stared out the window, processing everything that had happened. The king had ordered Victoria's removal from court pending investigation. Her father had publicly denounced his wife and formally apologized to his daughter. The conspiracy had unraveled in less than an hour. Victory felt strange. You kissed my hand, she said finally. Cadric didn't look at her. I did. That wasn't part of our agreement. No. It changes things. Yes. Alara turned to face him. Why did you do it? He finally met her eyes, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Not calculation. Not strategy. Something rawer, more dangerous. Because I'm tired of pretending, he admitted quietly. Pretending what? That protecting you is purely political. That having you in my house doesn't matter. That watching you walk into that court wearing my diamonds didn't make me want to destroy anyone who'd ever hurt you. Kedrick's jaw clenched. I'm tired of lying to myself about what you've become to me. What have I become? Something I can't afford but refuse to surrender. The words hung between them like a confession. Alara felt something shift in her chest. Recognition, maybe, or the terrifying acceptance of mutual danger. This is a terrible idea, she whispered. I know. We'll destroy each other. Probably. So what do we do? Kedrick reached across the distance between them, his hand finding hers in the darkness. We stop pretending this is just strategy. We acknowledge what's happening, and we decide if we're brave enough to see where it leads. Alara stared at their joined hands, at the monster who'd saved her, at the man who'd just publicly claimed her before the entire kingdom. I'm not brave, she said. Yes, you are. How do you know? Because you took my hand in the rain. His thumb traced circles against her palm. Because you challenged me in my own house. Because you stood before that court like a queen despite everything they tried to make you. I was terrified. Bravery isn't the absence of fear. Kedrick pulled her closer, gentle but insistent. It's choosing to move forward anyway. Their faces were inches apart now. Alara could feel his breath against her skin, could see gold flecks in his winter storm eyes that she'd never noticed before. If we do this, she whispered, everything changes. Everything already has. Kedrick, he kissed her. Not gentle, not hesitant, desperate and demanding and absolutely certain. His hand tangled in her hair while the other pulled her against him. Alara responded without thinking, pouring months of rage and fear and survival into the kiss. They broke apart, breathing hard. That was, Alara started. A mistake, Kedrick finished. Is it? Absolutely. But he didn't let go. A mistake we're going to keep making. Alara laughed, slightly hysterical. We're idiots. Probably. Your enemies will use this against you. Let them try. I'm serious. This gives them ammunition. I don't care. Kedrick's expression was fierce, almost violent in its intensity. I spent my entire life being careful, calculating, building an empire through ruthless pragmatism, and none of it matters as much as this, as you. You barely know me. I know you survived when everyone wanted you destroyed. I know you fight back instead of breaking. I know you see me clearly and don't flinch. His hand cupped her face. I know enough. Alara felt tears threatening, not from sadness, from the overwhelming weight of being seen, actually seen. Not as property or scandal or political pawn, but as a person worthy of, don't say you love me, she blurted. It's too soon, too dangerous, too... I wasn't going to. Kedrick's smile was crooked, almost boyish. I was going to say you're mine, which is different, possibly worse. How is that worse? Because love is a feeling. This? He gestured between them. This is a choice. Every day. Knowing the costs and consequences and choosing you anyway. The carriage pulled through Blackmore's gates. Their time was running out. What happens now? Alara asked. Now we face the consequences. Kedrick helped her from the carriage, his hand lingering on hers. Your stepmother will be tried and convicted. Your inheritance will be restored. The court will gossip for months about the Iron Duke claiming a disgraced woman. And us? We figure it out together. He pulled her close one more time, his lips against her ear. Because you're not going anywhere, and neither am I. That sounds like a threat. It's a promise. They stood there in Blackmore's courtyard while servants pretended not to notice, and the northern wind howled off the cliffs. Two damaged people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate wars. Not fixed, not whole, but no longer alone. Course. Mrs. Thatcher found Alara the next morning staring out her window at the violent gray sea. You look troubled, child. I kissed him. The housekeeper didn't look remotely surprised. About time. It's a disaster. Love usually is. I never said love. You didn't have to. Mrs. Thatcher began organizing Alara's things with brisk efficiency. I've watched that boy armor himself since he was 6 years old. You're the first person who's ever gotten through. What if I can't handle it? What if we destroy each other? Then you'll destroy each other magnificently. The older woman paused, something almost gentle in her expression. But I don't think you will. I think you'll save each other, or drive each other mad trying. That's not reassuring. It wasn't meant to be. Mrs. Thatcher headed for the door, then stopped. The Duke has never let anyone matter before. You matter. That's terrifying for him. Be patient. I'm not good at patience. Neither is he. Should be interesting. After the housekeeper left, Alara returned to her window. Somewhere below, Cadric was probably in his study, planning their next move. Always strategizing. Always calculating. Except when he looked at her. Then the Iron Duke became just a man. Just Cadric. And that was the most dangerous thing of all. Itchy. 3 days later, a letter arrived at Blackmore bearing the royal seal. Cadric read it twice before summoning Alara to his study. She entered to find him standing by the window, the letter crumpled in one fist. Something about his posture made her stomach drop. What happened? The king has invited us to the Winter Sovereign Ball. Cadric's voice was carefully controlled. It's a command performance disguised as a request. That's good, isn't it? Public acknowledgement. It's a trap. Bleak. Alara's breath caught. What kind of trap? The kind where enemies smile and serve poisoned wine, where accidents happen in crowded ballrooms. He turned to face her. Your stepmother's allies won't accept defeat quietly. They'll make their move at the ball where there are witnesses and plausible deniability. Then we don't go. We have to. Refusing would be political suicide. Cadric crossed to her, his expression fierce. But I swear to you, Alara, nothing will happen to you. Not while I breathe. She touched his face, feeling the tension in his jaw. You can't promise that. Watch me. And in his winter storm eyes, she saw absolute certainty. The Iron Duke had made a decision. The kingdom would burn before he let her fall. The Winter Sovereign Ball represented everything Cadric despised about the aristocracy. 600 nobles crammed into the palace ballroom wearing costumes that cost more than most families earned in a lifetime, pretending their smiles weren't weapons and their compliments weren't threats. Crystal chandeliers threw dancing shadows across marble floors, while musicians played compositions designed to drown out scheming whispers. Perfect hunting ground. Cadric stood near the entrance watching the predators circle, cataloging threats with the same precision he'd learned during childhood when survival meant identifying danger before it struck. Lord Ashworth by the champagne fountain, Victoria Thorne's cousin. Lady Merrick near the orchestra, wife of the nobleman whose face had gone purple when Cadric defended Alara at court. 3 more allies of the failed conspiracy scattered throughout the crowd, like chess pieces waiting for their master's command. Victoria herself remained absent. Smart woman. She'd been confined to her estate pending formal charges, but her network persisted. Wounded animals often proved more dangerous than healthy ones. Corvus materialized at his elbow. His steward had changed into formal attire but still moved through crowds like smoke, invisible until he chose otherwise. 6 exits, Corvus murmured, all monitored by palace guards loyal to various noble houses, none of them ours. Expected. Cadric's eyes tracked movement patterns. Assassins. At least 3 confirmed, more suspected. They'll wait until the crowd thickens. And Alara? Still preparing with Mrs. Thatcher. The housekeeper is treating this like military deployment. A smile threatened to break through Cadric's carefully maintained neutrality. Mrs. Thatcher had insisted on accompanying them specifically to armor Alara against whatever social warfare the court deployed. The older woman understood that battles weren't only fought with steel. When she arrives, stay close, Cadric said quietly. Not obvious, just present. Always. Corvus hesitated, which meant something significant was coming. Your Grace, if this goes poorly, it won't. But if it does, then I'll burn this palace to the ground before letting them touch her. Cadric's voice dropped to something barely human. Make sure our people understand that. Corvus simply nodded and vanished back into the crowd. Cadric returned his attention to the ballroom's theatrical performance. Nobles laughed too loudly at mediocre jokes. Women fluttered fans while calculating marriage prospects. Men discussed politics in corners while servants refilled glasses fast enough to keep everyone's guard lowered. Then the herald's voice cut through the noise. Lady Alara Thorne, under protection of His Grace, Duke Cadric Ashford of Blackmore. The music didn't stop, but conversations did. Alara appeared at the top of the grand staircase wearing emerald silk that caught the candlelight like liquid fire. Mrs. Thatcher had outdone herself. The gown was modest by court standards, but cut to emphasize Alara's frame in ways that made dismissing her impossible. Blackmore emeralds glittered at her throat and wrists, territorial markers that announced exactly who protected her. But it was Alara's expression that made Kedrick's chest tighten. No fear, no hesitation. She descended those stairs like she owned them, head high, spine straight, every inch the aristocrat these people had tried to destroy. The disgraced woman wore her resurrection like armor. Magnificent. She found him immediately. Their eyes locked across the ballroom, and something electric passed between them. Recognition, challenge, the unspoken acknowledgement that they were walking into fire together. Kedrick crossed the floor to meet her at the base of the stairs, aware of every eye tracking his movement. He extended his hand. She took it without hesitation, fingers warm against his. "You look like war," he murmured. "Good." Her smile was sharp enough to cut. "That's the point." They moved into the ballroom proper. Nobles parted like water, creating space that felt more like avoidance than respect. Whispers followed in their wake. Kedrick caught fragments. "Actually brought her." Audacity is astounding. What is he thinking? He wasn't thinking. That was the problem. Or maybe the solution. For the first time in his carefully controlled life, Kedrick Ashford had stopped calculating optimal outcomes and simply chosen what he wanted. Dangerous precedent. The king held court on a raised dais surrounded by advisors who looked increasingly uncomfortable. His Majesty gestured for Kedrick and Alara to approach. Standard protocol. Also a test. They navigated through the crowd, Kedrick's hand resting against Alara's back, feeling tension coiled in her muscles beneath silk. She was terrified, just hid it better than anyone else would. "Your Grace." The king's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Lady Alara, we are pleased you could attend." Translation: I'm furious you've created this situation but can't afford open conflict. Kedrick bowed precisely enough to show respect without submission. "Your Majesty honors us with the invitation." Such says. "Indeed." The king's gaze shifted to Alara, assessing. "Lady Thorne, we trust the Duke's protection has been adequate?" A loaded question. Alara understood immediately. "His Grace's protection has been everything I could ask for, Your Majesty." Her voice carried across the suddenly quiet dais. "He has restored what was stolen and defended what others sought to destroy." Several advisors shifted uncomfortably. Alara had just implied the crown had failed to protect her where Kedrick succeeded. Bold. Reckless. Perfect. The king's expression hardened fractionally. "Yes. Well, justice moves slowly but thoroughly. The matter of your stepmother will be resolved soon. But I trust your Majesty's wisdom in all things." Another perfect courtly response that meant absolutely nothing. The king recognized the deflection and clearly didn't appreciate it, but dismissing them now would appear petty. "Enjoy the festivities," he said instead, waving them away. They retreated into the crowd. Kedrick guided Alara toward a less populated section near the windows overlooking the palace gardens. Snow fell outside, muffling the city beyond in white silence. "That went better than expected," Alara murmured. "We're still alive, low bar." "Should I be concerned about the bar being that low?" "Probably." She laughed quietly, some of the tension leaving her frame. Kedrick wanted to pull her closer, but they had enough witnesses already. Every move they made tonight would be analyzed, weaponized, used against them later. "Your Grace." Kedrick turned to find Lord Ashworth approaching with champagne and calculated friendliness. Victoria's cousin. The man who'd publicly questioned Kedrick's judgment at court. Interesting. "Lord Ashworth." Kedrick's tone could have frosted glass. "I wanted to apologize for my previous comments. They were spoken in haste and ignorance." Ashworth's smile was all performance. "I see now that Lady Alara is indeed worthy of your protection." Translation: I'm repositioning because my allies abandoned me. "How magnanimous," Kedrick said flatly. "I only hope there are no hard feelings." Ashworth extended a glass toward Alara. "Peace offering?" "Well, what's?" Alara's fingers moved toward the champagne. Kedrick's hand shot out, catching her wrist gently but firmly. "Lady Alara doesn't drink champagne," he lied smoothly. "Gives her headaches." Ashworth's smile faltered. "I wasn't aware. Now you are." The nobleman's eyes flickered between them, calculating. Then he withdrew the glass with a strained laugh. "Of course. My apologies. Perhaps later." He melted back into the crowd. Alara stared at Kadric. He was going to poison me. Probably. You just stopped an assassination attempt, and you sound bored. Third one this week. Gets repetitive. Kadric's grip on her wrist softened but didn't release. Stay close. Don't accept food or drink from anyone but me or Mrs. Thatcher. That's reassuring. It's realistic. A waltz began. Couples flooded the dance floor in practice formations that looked more like military drills than romance. Kadric watched them, calculating odds. Dancing meant vulnerability, meant losing visual control of the room, meant trusting the crowd wouldn't close in while he was distracted. It also meant holding Alara publicly, claiming her before everyone who'd tried to destroy her, worth the risk. Dance with me, he said. Alara's eyes widened. Are you asking or commanding? Does it matter? Always. Oh, asking then. Kadric extended his hand again, this time with something that might have been vulnerability in his expression. Dance with me. Please. She studied him for a long moment, then placed her hand in his. You're going to regret teaching me to demand things from you. I regret nothing. They moved on to the dance floor while conversations erupted around them. The disgraced woman dancing with the Iron Duke at the Winter Sovereign Ball. Tomorrow's scandal being written in real time. Kadric pulled Alara into position, one hand at her waist, the other clasping hers. The waltz demanded proximity. Their faces were inches apart. He could feel her breath against his skin. I don't know this dance, she admitted quietly. Follow my lead. Bossy. Practical, Sharky. Yes. They began moving. Alara stumbled once, caught herself, found the rhythm. Her body aligned with his like they'd been doing this for years instead of seconds. Muscle memory, or something deeper. Kadric didn't examine it too closely. Around them, other couples maintained careful distance, creating a bubble of isolation in the crowded ballroom. No one wanted to get too close to the Duke's new obsession. They're staring, Alara murmured. Let them. This is making things worse for you. Good. How is that good? Kadric spun her through a turn, pulling her back against him with perhaps more force than the dance required. Because I'm tired of playing their games. Tired of pretending I care about their opinions. Tired of acting like you're anything less than exactly what I want. Alara's breath caught. Kadric? Say it again. What? My name. You're the only person who uses it. His hand tightened at her waist. Say it again. Kadric. She breathed it like a secret. You're being reckless. I'm being honest. Same thing for you. Maybe that's the point. The music swelled. They moved through turns and patterns while snow fell outside and enemies watched from shadows. Kadric felt the weight of attention like physical pressure, but for once he didn't care about strategic implications. This moment, this woman, this choice, everything else was noise. When this is over, Alara said quietly, when the threats are gone and my inheritance is secure and we've survived whatever trap they're planning tonight, what happens then? What do you want to happen? I asked first. Fair point. Kadric considered lying, deflecting, maintaining the careful walls he'd spent decades constructing. Then looked into smoke-gray eyes and found he couldn't. I want you to stay, he admitted, at Blackmore, with me. Not as protection, not as strategy, just stay. Why? Because you see me clearly and don't flinch. Because you challenge everything I thought I understood about control and power. Because every room feels wrong when you're not in it. The confession felt like bleeding. Because I don't know how to want something this much, and I need to figure it out. Alara's expression softened into something that looked like pain and hope combined. That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me. Don't get used to it. Too late. The waltz ended. Couples separated, applauding politely. Kadric and Alara stood frozen in position, still holding each other while the ballroom dissolved into intermission chaos. Mrs. Thatcher appeared like a summoned demon, her severe face communicating urgency without words. We have a problem, she said quietly. Kadric released Alara reluctantly. Where? East Wing. One of the servers just collapsed, symptoms consistent with poisoning. Ice flooded Kadric's veins. They're testing the wine. We're creating a distraction. Mrs. Thatcher's eyes scanned the crowd. Either way, it means the real attack is coming. Kadric grabbed Alara's hand. We're leaving. Now. But the ballroom doors had already closed. All 6 exits. Simultaneously. Palace guards stood before each one, faces carefully neutral. Not preventing departure, just controlling it, making people ask permission, a trap within a trap. Kedrick's mind raced through options. Fighting through guards meant confirming their fears about his dangerous instability. Demanding exit meant showing weakness. Staying meant accepting whatever came next. No good choices. "The gardens," Alara whispered. "Windows overlook them. We could—" Too exposed. Assassins love gardens. Dark, private, easy to stage accidents. Then what? Kedrick scanned the ballroom, calculating. Corvus had disappeared. Smart. His steward was better deployed outside direct confrontation. Mrs. Thatcher stood ready to commit violence despite being 60 and armed only with a fan. The crowd pressed closer, not overtly threatening, but definitely not friendly. Then the music stopped, not a natural pause. Someone had signaled the orchestra. Silence crashed over the ballroom like a physical force. A man stepped onto the orchestra platform. Tall, distinguished, wearing decorations that marked him as Duke of Westmarch, one of the most powerful nobles in the kingdom. Alara's hand tightened in Kedrick's. "That's Lord Pembroke's father-in-law." Of course it was. The Duke of Westmarch surveyed the silent ballroom with the confidence of a man who'd never questioned his right to command attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, voice carrying effortlessly, "I apologize for the disruption, but I have evidence that demands immediate attention." Kedrick's jaw clenched. Here it came. Whatever accusation they'd manufactured, whatever trap they'd designed. "It has come to my attention," Westmarch continued, "that Duke Ashford's protection of Lady Alara Thorne may involve more than chivalry." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Alara's breathing accelerated. Kedrick forced himself to remain still, showing nothing. "Evidence suggests," Westmarch said, producing documents with theatrical precision, "that the Duke and Lady Thorne have engaged in improper relations. That his protection stems not from justice, but from personal involvement beginning before her supposed disgrace." Gasps. Whispers. The social machinery grinding to life. Whispers. "This calls into question everything," Westmarch declared. "Lady Alara's innocence, the Duke's motives, the legitimacy of his intervention at court. Brilliant strategy. They couldn't destroy Kedrick directly, so they destroyed the foundation of his defense. If his relationship with Alara predated her scandal, then maybe the scandal itself was staged. Maybe Victoria Thorne was innocent. Maybe everything was conspiracy. Plant doubt. Watch it grow. Let social pressure do the rest." Kedrick felt Alara trembling beside him, not from fear, from rage. He recognized it because he felt the same thing building in his chest. Enough. He stepped forward, pulling Alara with him. The crowd parted. 600 nobles held their collective breath. "Duke Westmarch," Kedrick said quietly, dangerously. "Those are serious accusations." Supported by evidence, Westmarch gestured with the documents. Testimonies from servants, correspondence, documented meetings before the scandal occurred. All forged. "You would say that?" "I would say that because it's true." Kedrick's voice remained level, but something beneath it promised violence. "Your evidence is manufactured by the same conspiracy that destroyed Lady Alara's reputation initially. Convenient claim. Provable fact." Kedrick released Alara's hand, moving closer to the platform. "But you're not interested in truth. You're interested in revenge, because I destroyed your son-in-law's political future when I revealed his participation in fraud." Westmarch's expression flickered. "This isn't about—" "It's exactly about that." Kedrick stopped at the base of the platform, looking up at the older Duke. "Your daughter's husband conspired with Victoria Thorne. I exposed him. Now you're attempting to salvage your family's reputation by destroying mine." "How dare you speak?" "How dare I what? Speak truth before witnesses?" Kedrick's smile was pure ice. "You've made a critical error, Westmarch. You assumed I'd protect my reputation over hers. That social pressure would force me to abandon Lady Alara to save myself. Any reasonable man would—" "I'm not reasonable." Kedrick turned to face the entire ballroom. "I stopped being reasonable the moment I pulled her from the mud and realized I'd found something worth more than political capital." Dead silence. "So here's what's going to happen," Kedrick continued. "You can continue this performance. Spread your lies. Rally support from every noble family who fears Blackmore's influence. And I will systematically dismantle each of you with the same precision I've deployed for 20 years. His voice dropped lower, harder. Or you can accept that Lady Alara Thorne is under my permanent protection, that attacking her means attacking me, that I will burn this entire aristocracy to ash before letting you touch her again. Someone gasped. A woman near the back fainted. Lord Ashworth looked like he might vomit. Westmarch's face had gone purple. You're threatening? I'm promising. Kedrick climbed onto the platform, invading the older Duke's space. Choose wisely. For a moment, violence hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Two dukes facing each other before the entire court. One mistake, and blood would stain the palace marble. Then Alara's voice cut through the tension. Enough! Everyone turned. She stood at the center of the ballroom, head high, emeralds catching candlelight. Duke Westmarch, she said clearly, your evidence is forged. I can prove it. But more importantly, even if it weren't, even if the Duke and I had been involved before my stepmother's attack, that wouldn't change the facts of what she did. Murmurs of surprise. Alara pressed forward. She forged documents. She bribed witnesses. She orchestrated a conspiracy to steal my inheritance and destroy my life. The Duke's personal feelings, whatever they may be, don't alter those crimes. She moved through the crowd, nobles parting before her. So you have a choice, Alara continued. Believe Duke Westmarch's manufactured scandal and ignore actual evidence of conspiracy. Or acknowledge that powerful men tried to destroy a woman who threatened their comfortable control, and one man had the courage to stop them. She reached the platform, standing beside Kedrick. United front. I know what the evidence says, Westmarch sputtered. I have testimonies from servants Victoria paid. Alara's voice remained steady. I can provide counter-testimony. Bank records showing the payments. Correspondence proving the coordination. You're lying to protect yourself. I'm telling the truth to protect the truth. Alara glanced at Kedrick. And yes, the Duke matters to me. More than politics or reputation or your opinion. But that doesn't make Victoria innocent. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Some nobles shouted support. Others demanded investigations. A few simply fled toward the exits, unwilling to be associated with either side. Westmarch stared between Kedrick and Alara, clearly recalculating. His gambit had failed. Worse, it had exposed him as part of the conspiracy's remnants. This isn't over, he said weakly. Yes, it is. Kedrick's hand found Alara's, fingers interlacing. Go home, Westmarch. Salvage what remains of your dignity. Because if you continue this, I'll expose every corrupt dealing you've ever conducted, every bribe, every fraud, every skeleton in your family's closet. You have no proof. I have everything. Kedrick's smile was a predator's warning. I've been collecting it for years. Insurance. Now it's ammunition. Westmarch's face cycled through expressions. Rage, fear, calculation. Finally settling on defeat. He descended from the platform and left through the nearest exit without another word. The ballroom slowly came back to life. Conversations restarted. Musicians began playing again. The aristocracy's remarkable ability to ignore uncomfortable truths reasserted itself. But nothing was the same. Kedrick had just publicly chosen Alara over everything else. Over politics, over reputation, over the careful empire he'd spent his life building. No going back. They stood together on the platform while the party resumed around them. Alara's hand trembled in his. That was insane, she whispered. I know. You just destroyed your political standing. I know. Half those nobles will turn against you now. Probably. And you don't care, not even slightly. Kedrick pulled her closer, uncaring about witnesses. Are you all right? I think so. Alara's smoke-gray eyes searched his. You really meant it. Everything you said. Every word. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the stupidest. Can't I be both? She laughed, slightly hysterical. We're ruined. We're free. Kedrick touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. No more pretending, no more strategy, just us making choices and accepting consequences. That's terrifying. That's living. Music swelled. Couples returned to dancing. The Winter Sovereign Ball continued as if the last 15 minutes hadn't happened. Aristocratic denial at its finest. But Kedrick noticed the shifted dynamics. Certain nobles approached where before they'd avoided. Others who'd seemed friendly now kept distance. battle lines being redrawn in real time. Misses. Thatcher appeared at the base of the platform. We should leave, before someone else tries something creative. Agreed. Kedrick helped Alara down. Where's Corvus? Securing the carriage. He wants to change routes. Says the planned path is too predictable. Smart. Kedrick nodded. They moved toward the nearest exit, Alara between him and Mrs. Thatcher, protected on both sides. The palace guard at the door stepped aside without question. Interesting. Either they'd received new orders, or they'd simply decided antagonizing the Iron Duke wasn't worth their salary. Outside, snow fell heavier now, coating the palace grounds in white silence. Their carriage waited in the circular drive, Corvus beside it, looking tense. Problem? Kedrick asked. 3 men followed you from the ballroom, staying back but definitely tracking. Corvus's eyes scanned the darkness. Could be guards. Could be assassins. Can't confirm which. Assume worst. Always do. They climbed into the carriage. Kedrick positioned himself so he could see both windows while keeping Alara behind him. Mrs. Thatcher sat opposite, her reticule probably concealing something sharp. The carriage lurched into motion. For several minutes, silence. Just hoofbeats and wheels on cobblestones and snow muffling the city beyond. Then Alara spoke quietly. What you did back there. What you said. I meant it. I know. Her hand found his in the darkness. That's what scares me. Why? Because people who matter to you become weapons against you. Your enemies will use me. Every threat, every attack. I'm your vulnerability now. Kedrick turned to face her fully. You were always my vulnerability. Tonight just made it official. How can you be so calm about that? Because vulnerability only matters if you're trying to survive alone. His fingers tightened around hers. I'm not alone anymore. Alara's breath hitched. Before she could respond, the carriage lurched violently to the side. Kedrick's battle instincts engaged instantly. He threw himself over Alara as the carriage tilted, pressing her against the seat, while wood groaned and horses screamed outside. They weren't crashing. They were being forced off the road. The carriage slammed to a stop. Kedrick pushed away from Alara, reaching for the knife he always carried in his boot. Misses. Thatcher already had something that looked disturbingly like a stiletto extracted from her reticule. Stay down, Kedrick ordered. Voices outside. At least 4 men. Maybe more. Corvus's voice rose above them, shouting something defiant before being cut off. Then silence. The carriage door opened. A man Kedrick didn't recognize stood there with a pistol aimed directly at Alara. Out, he said quietly. Both of you, slowly. Kedrick's mind raced through options. Rush him and maybe die. Comply and definitely face worse. Bargain and show weakness. All terrible. If you harm her, Kedrick said softly, I will find everyone you've ever loved and make them beg for death. The man's expression didn't change. Out, now, or I shoot her and drag you out anyway. No choice. Kedrick helped Alara from the carriage, keeping himself between her and the gunmen. Outside, snow fell through darkness. They'd been forced into some kind of service alley. No witnesses. No help. 4 men surrounded them. Corvus lay unconscious against the carriage wheel, blood seeping from a head wound. Misses. Thatcher was being restrained by 2 more attackers, who looked terrified of the 60-year-old woman trying to stab them. Professional operation. Military precision. This wasn't Victoria's remaining allies. This was something worse. A figure emerged from shadows beyond the torchlight. Tall, elegant, wearing a military coat with decorations Kedrick recognized from official state functions. Lord Chancellor Thaddeus Crane. The king's right hand. Kedrick felt cold certainty settle into his chest. The conspiracy went higher than he'd realized. Your Grace. Crane's voice was cultured, civilized. Crane's completely at odds with the violence surrounding them. I apologize for the theatrics, but you've forced this confrontation. Whoop. The king sent you, Kedrick said flatly. His Majesty is concerned about your recent behavior. Your obsession with Lady Thorne, your threats against noble families, your destabilization of court politics. So he sends assassins. I prefer to think of them as problem solvers. Crane stepped closer. You've become a problem, Duke Ashford. A dangerous, unpredictable problem. Alara's hand gripped Kaedric's arm. He could feel her shaking, not fear. Rage again. She understood what was happening. They'd survived the ball only to face something worse. "Let her go," Kaedric said. "This is between us. She's irrelevant. She's your weakness." Crane's smile was almost sympathetic. The mighty Iron Duke brought low by a disgraced woman. It's almost poetic. Touch her and You'll what? You're surrounded, outnumbered. Your steward is unconscious. Your housekeeper is restrained. You have no leverage. Truth, bitter and complete. Kaedric had walked into this moment exactly as they'd planned. His obsession with protecting Alara had made him predictable. Fatal mistake. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. "Simple. Renounce your protection of Lady Thorn. Publicly apologize for your behavior at the ball. Return to Blackmore and cease interfering with court politics. And if I refuse," Crane gestured to the gunmen, "then she dies. Here, now. And we tell everyone it was a tragic accident. Bandits attacking a carriage. You tried to save her, but failed. So sad." Mabush. Kaedric felt something break inside his chest. Not his will. Something deeper. The careful control he'd maintained since childhood. The walls that kept emotion separate from strategy. They crumbled. "You think threatening her gives you power over me?" he said softly, dangerously. "You're wrong. It just removes my reason to show mercy." Crane laughed. "You're in no position to—" Kaedric moved. 20 years of weapons training deployed in 2 seconds. He grabbed Alara, spun her behind him, and threw his knife at the gunman in one fluid motion. The blade caught the man's wrist. The pistol fired wild, bullets sparking off cobblestones. Chaos erupted. Kaedric charged the nearest attacker, using momentum and surprise to drive the man into the carriage with bone-breaking force, grabbed another by the throat. Felt ribs crack under his fist. He'd spent his entire adult life being civilized, controlled, calculating violence instead of deploying it. No more calculation, just violence. An attacker swung something heavy at his head. Kaedric ducked, felt it graze his shoulder, came up inside the man's guard, and broke his nose with a headbutt. Blood sprayed across snow. Someone grabbed him from behind, arms around his throat, choking. Kaedric drove backward into the carriage wheel, using his attacker's body to cushion impact. The grip loosened. He spun free, grabbed the man's head, and slammed it against wood until resistance stopped. 4 down. 2 remaining plus Crane. The Lord Chancellor had drawn a pistol, aiming it at Alara, where she'd pressed herself against the carriage. "Enough!" Crane shouted. "Stop or I shoot her!" Kaedric froze, breathing hard, covered in other people's blood. His shoulder throbbed where he'd been hit. His knuckles were split. Didn't matter. Alara was still alive. That was all that mattered. "Very impressive," Crane said, "but ultimately futile. You've just demonstrated exactly why you're too dangerous to control." "Then shoot me," Kaedric said. "Kill me and let her go." "No." Everyone turned. Alara had somehow acquired a knife. Probably Mrs. Thatcher had concealed a spare, and now held it against her own throat. "You want leverage?" Her voice was steady despite the blade at her skin. "Here's leverage. Let us leave or I do your job for you, and the Duke destroys every one of you afterward." Crane's expression flickered. "You're bluffing." "Try me." Alara's eyes were pure steel. "I survived my stepmother's conspiracy. Survived court politics. Survived assassins at a ball. You think I'm afraid of dying? I'm afraid of living as a weapon against the only person who's ever chosen me over everything else." Silence. Snow fell. Somewhere in the city, bells tolled midnight. Crane lowered his pistol slowly. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," Alara said, "because if you come after us again, I'll tell everyone. The King's Lord Chancellor orchestrating assassinations, using crown authority to murder inconvenient nobles. How do you think that plays at court? No one would believe you. They'd believe him." She gestured to Kaedric. "The Iron Duke, beloved by no one but feared by everyone. His word against yours. Want to gamble which one society accepts? Brilliant, terrifying, perfect." Crane stared at them for a long moment, calculating odds. Finally, he stepped back, gesturing to his remaining men. "This is temporary mercy," he said. "The king's concerns remain. Your behavior continues to destabilize the kingdom." "Then tell His Majesty that the Duke of Blackmore chooses his battles carefully," Kaedric said quietly. "And he's chosen this one." The attackers retreated into darkness, leaving bodies and blood and the wreckage of civilized society behind. Corvus groaned, returning to consciousness. Mrs. Thatcher freed herself from the unconscious men who'd restrained her and immediately began checking Alara for injuries. Kedrick stood in the snow, watching his enemies disappear, feeling the weight of what had just happened settle into his bones. No going back. Not anymore. The king himself had sanctioned their deaths, which meant Blackmore was now at war with the crown. Alara appeared beside him, knife still in hand, looking small and fierce and absolutely unbreakable. "That was the stupidest thing you've ever done," he said. "Holding a knife to my own throat or standing with you?" "Both." "Probably." She didn't lower the blade. "But it worked." This time is all we have." Kedrick pulled her against him, not caring about witnesses or propriety or any of the rules he'd broken tonight. She fit against his chest like she'd been designed for that exact space. "We're at war now," he murmured into her hair. "With the crown, with the court, with everyone. I know. We might not survive it. I know that too. And you're still here." Alara pulled back enough to look up at him. Snow caught in her dark hair like stars. "Where else would I be?" Something that might have been a laugh escaped his throat. "Anywhere smarter. Smart is overrated." She finally lowered the knife. "Staying alive with you is more interesting." They stood there in the wreckage of the ambush while Corvus organized their escape and Mrs. Thatcher muttered about the stupidity of men who thought violence solved problems. Kedrick understood that everything had changed tonight. He'd declared war on the crown for a woman, chosen love over empire, accepted that his carefully constructed life was burning and all he cared about was pulling Alara from the flames. No strategy could fix this. No calculation could predict the outcome. Just two damaged people against the world, making impossible choices and refusing to regret them. The carriage limped toward Blackmore through falling snow. Behind them, the capital's lights glittered like a warning. Ahead, only darkness and uncertainty and the terrifying freedom of having nothing left to lose. Kedrick held Alara's hand in the darkness and smiled. Let them come. He'd been waiting his entire life to stop being careful. Now, he finally had a reason. Blackmore felt different when they returned. Kedrick noticed it immediately as their damaged carriage limped through the fortress gates. The guards moved with hesitation instead of precision. Servants avoided eye contact. Even the stones seemed colder, like the entire structure had absorbed the night's violence and decided it wanted no part of what came next. Mrs. Thatcher helped Alara from the carriage while Corvus directed men to tend the injured horses. Kedrick stood in the courtyard, cataloging damage, split knuckles, bruised ribs, shoulder screaming from where he'd been hit. Nothing permanent, just reminders that violence always costs something. The real damage wasn't physical. The king had sanctioned their deaths. The Lord Chancellor had personally orchestrated an assassination, which meant everything Kedrick had built through decades of careful political maneuvering had just collapsed because he'd chosen one woman over an empire. Worth it. The thought came unbidden, but certain. Even knowing what it cost, he'd make the same choice again. Dangerous precedent. He followed Alara and Mrs. Thatcher inside. The fortress halls echoed with their footsteps, emptier than usual. Some servants had probably fled already, sensing the coming storm. Smart. Blackmore was about to become the most dangerous place in the kingdom. Mrs. Thatcher deposited Alara in her chambers with instructions to wash and rest that sounded more like military orders. The older woman's hands shook slightly as she spoke, barely perceptible. But Kedrick noticed. Even she understood they'd crossed into territory without maps. He retreated to his study, poured whiskey he didn't drink, and stared at maps of the kingdom while his mind worked through impossible equations. The king wanted him dead or broken. The court would turn against him now. His allies, those few who'd tolerated his ruthlessness because it served their purposes, would abandon him the moment association became liability. Standard political calculus. Except Kedrick had never been standard. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Greaves entered without waiting for permission, which meant bad news. His chief solicitor looked like he'd aged 10 years since morning. "Tell me," Kedrick said flatly. 3 noble houses have formally withdrawn their trade agreements. 2 more are considering it. The Earl of Pemberton sent a letter suggesting you resign your titles and retreat to private life. Greaves set documents on the desk like he was handling corpses. And there's a rumor the king is preparing charges of treason. Based on what evidence? Does it matter? They'll manufacture whatever they need. The solicitor's thin face twisted with something almost like pain. Your Grace, I've served your family for 30 years. I've never questioned your judgment, but this, say it. Is she worth destroying everything? Kedrick looked at the man who'd guided him through legal battles, inheritance disputes, and political warfare since he'd inherited the dukedom at 19. Greaves had been loyal when loyalty meant something. Now he was asking if Alara was worth the cost. Fair question. Yes, Kedrick said simply. Greaves studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly, something like resignation settling over his features. Then I suggest we prepare for siege, because the king won't stop until you surrender or die. Let him try. Your Grace, I've survived worse than crown politics. I'll survive this. Ease. Not without allies. Greaves gestured to the documents. You're isolated. Every house that might have supported you is distancing themselves. You're alone. I have Alara, one woman against a kingdom, one woman who held a knife to her own throat to save us both. Kedrick's smile was cold and sharp. I'll take that over 100 political allies who'd abandoned me the moment the wind shifted. Up. Greaves opened his mouth, closed it, finally just shook his head. I'll do what I can with the legal framework. But laws only matter when people choose to follow them. Right now, the Crown is writing its own rules. After the solicitor departed, Kedrick returned to his maps. Blackmore's defensive position was strong. The fortress could withstand siege for months, maybe longer. But military strength meant nothing against political isolation. The king wouldn't attack with armies. He'd starve them with bureaucracy, strangle them with sanctions, suffocate them with the weight of an entire aristocracy turned hostile. Death by 1,000 cuts. Kedrick was still calculating options when Corvus appeared in the doorway, blood cleaned from his head, but his expression grim. We have a visitor, his steward said quietly. Lord Ashworth. He's demanding an audience. Victoria's cousin, the man who tried to poison Alara at the ball. Bold, stupid, both. Armed? Kedrick asked. 2 guards with him, both waiting outside. He came alone to the study door. Interesting. Either genuine diplomacy or spectacular arrogance. Kedrick gestured permission. Corvus stepped aside, and Lord Ashworth entered, looking significantly less confident than he had at the ball. The nobleman stopped 3 feet from the desk, maintaining careful distance. Smart. He understood he was entering a predator's den. Your Grace, Ashworth began, I come with an offer from certain parties who wish to resolve this situation peacefully. Certain parties meaning the king, among others. Kedrick leaned back in his chair, studying the man like a specimen under glass. Speak. But. Ashworth's throat worked. The Crown is willing to overlook your recent behavior. The accusations against you will be quietly withdrawn. Your political standing will be restored. Trade agreements reinstated. Everything returns to how it was. In exchange for what? Lady Alara Thorne. Silence crashed into the study like a physical force. Kedrick felt something cold settle into his chest. Not surprise. Certainty. They'd known exactly where to strike. Elaborate, he said quietly. She returns to her stepmother's custody. The original scandal is quietly confirmed. She disappears to a suitable location where she can live comfortably but removed from society. Ashworth spoke quickly, like delivering the words faster made them less terrible. You maintain your position. The kingdom stabilizes. Everyone benefits. Everyone except Alara, yet. She's one woman, Your Grace, against the stability of the entire northern territories, the political alliances you've built, the power you wield. Ashworth's voice took on a pleading quality. Surely you see the logic. Kedrick stood slowly, moving around the desk with deliberate precision. Ashworth stepped back instinctively. Let me understand, Kedrick said softly. You're asking me to surrender the woman I've publicly defended, privately chosen, and literally fought assassins to protect. In exchange for political stability. Yes. And you thought I'd agree to this. We thought you'd be reasonable. Kedrick's hand shot out, grabbing Ashworth by the throat and slamming him against the wall hard enough to rattle ancestral portraits. The nobleman gasped, clawing at Kedrick's grip. Listen carefully, Kedrick whispered, inches from Ashworth's terrified face. I burned my political capital for her. I defied the king for her. I killed men in a snow-covered alley for her. What makes you think I'd surrender her for something as worthless as your approval? The king, Ashworth choked out. The king can come himself if he wants to negotiate. Kedrick tightened his grip fractionally. But send another messenger with this insulting offer and I'll mail his head back as my response. Understood? Ashworth managed a strangled nod. Cadric released him. The nobleman collapsed, gasping, scrambling toward the door, with the desperation of a man who'd just glimpsed his own mortality. Tell them I refuse, Cadric called after him, and tell them I'm done pretending to care about their rules. Ashworth fled. Corvus emerged from the shadows where he'd been observing. That's going to have consequences. Everything has consequences. Cadric returned to his desk, adrenaline still singing through his veins. At least these ones I choose. His steward studied him with an expression that might have been concern or respect or both. You've changed, Your Grace. Have I? The old you would have calculated the political costs before choosing violence. The old you would have at least considered their offer. The old me didn't have anything worth more than strategy. Kedric's hand found the whiskey glass again. Now I do. That makes you vulnerable. That makes me human. Corvus left without responding, which meant he disagreed but was too loyal to argue. Caedric stood alone in his study, surrounded by maps and reports, and the accumulated evidence of an empire he'd built through ruthless calculation. All of it suddenly felt hollow compared to the memory of Alara holding a knife to her own throat rather than be used against him. Power had always been the point, until it wasn't. He was still processing that shift when the door opened again, this time without knocking. Only one person in Blackmore had that privilege. Alara entered wearing a simple dress, hair still damp from washing. She'd cleaned away the ball's makeup and violence, but exhaustion showed in the shadows beneath her eyes. You should be resting, Cadric said. I heard shouting. She moved to the desk, studying the scattered documents. What happened? He could lie, deflect, protect her from the ugliness of what they'd just offered. But they were past lies. The king sent an offer, Cadric said quietly. My political rehabilitation in exchange for you. Alara's breath caught. Not shock, just confirmation of something she'd expected. What did you say? I refused. Before or after you tried to kill the messenger? During. A smile ghosted across her face, brief and pained. You're making this worse. I know. They'll escalate. The king won't stop until you're destroyed or I'm gone. I know that too. Alara circled the desk, standing close enough that Caedric could smell soap and something uniquely her beneath it. Why are you doing this? You know why. Say it anyway. Caedric turned to face her fully. In the candlelight, she looked fragile and fierce in equal measure, a contradiction that had somehow become the only thing he was certain about. Because the moment I pulled you from that mud, something broke inside me, he admitted. All the careful control I'd built, all the walls that kept emotions separate from strategy. You shattered them just by refusing to stay broken. That's not a reason to destroy yourself. It's the only reason that matters. His hand found her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone. I've spent 35 years being the Iron Duke, feared, respected, alone. And none of it felt like living until you walked into my fortress wearing borrowed clothes and challenged everything I thought I understood about power. Alara's eyes glistened. This is insane. Completely. We're going to lose everything. Probably. And you're still choosing this, choosing me, every time. Caedric pulled her closer. The king can take my titles. The court can take my alliances. They can reduce me to nothing but a name and a crumbling fortress. But they can't make me regret choosing you. She kissed him then, desperate and certain and absolutely unafraid despite the world collapsing around them. They broke apart, breathing hard. What do we do now? Alara whispered. We prepare for war. Real war. Not political maneuvering, actual siege. Caedric's mind was already working through logistics. Blackmore can hold for months. We have supplies, defensible position, loyal guards. A knock interrupted. Corvus again, moving with unusual urgency. Your Grace, we have a situation at the gate. Caedric's hand moved instinctively toward the knife he'd retrieved from his boot. Attackers? No, refugees. Corvus's expression was unreadable. Servants from the capital, minor nobles who've lost their positions, people fleeing the king's new decrees. Why? What decrees? Anyone associated with you is being investigated for treason, homes searched, assets frozen. Several families have been arrested on manufactured charges. The steward's voice remained level, but something beneath it suggested horror. They're making examples. Collective punishment. The king was purging anyone connected to Blackmore, spreading terror to prevent others from offering support. Brutal? Effective. Exactly what Cadric would have done if their positions were reversed. How many refugees? He asked. 30 at the gate, more arriving hourly, according to scouts. Cadric processed this. Feeding 30 extra mouths during siege preparation was strategically questionable, but turning away people who'd been destroyed for their association with him felt wrong in ways strategy couldn't address. Let them in, he decided. All of them. Find them quarters. Put the able-bodied to work fortifying defenses. Corvus nodded and departed. Alara stared at Cadric. You just increased our supply problems. I know. Isa. And added potential spies to our population. I know that too. So why do it? Because the king wants me to become the monster they fear. Ruthless, heartless, proving their propaganda correct. Cadric's jaw tightened. I won't give him that satisfaction. Even if it costs us the siege? Even then. She studied him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. You really have changed. Is that bad? I don't know yet. Alara's hand found his. Ask me when we're not facing annihilation. The next week dissolved into controlled chaos. Refugees continued arriving. Blackmore's population swelled from 200 to nearly 400. Corvus organized them with military efficiency, assigning quarters, distributing tasks, integrating them into the fortress's defensive structure. Greaves worked frantically to secure remaining assets before the crown could freeze them. He succeeded in hiding enough wealth to fund the fortress for 6 months, maybe longer with rationing. Mrs. Thatcher transformed the kitchens into a logistical miracle, stretching supplies through sheer force of will and terrifying competence. And Cadric prepared for war. He inspected every wall, every gate, every defensive position. Drilled guards until they moved like extensions of his will. Stockpiled weapons, medical supplies, everything siege warfare demanded. Alara worked beside him through all of it. She organized the refugees, mediated disputes, somehow transformed terrified strangers into a functional community. People responded to her with the same respect they showed Cadric, which said something about her natural authority. Or maybe just her refusal to break under pressure. 10 days after the ball, a royal courier arrived under flag of truce. Cadric met him at the gate, Corvus and 6 armed guards flanking him. The courier looked young and terrified, clearly aware he was delivering a death sentence. His Majesty demands your surrender, the boy stammered, reading from an official document. You are charged with treason, conspiracy, and sedition. Failure to appear at court within 3 days will result in your titles being stripped, and Blackmore declared in rebellion against the crown. Tell His Majesty I decline, Cadric said calmly. The courier's eyes widened. Your Grace, that's tantamount to declaring war. Then we're at war. Cadric gestured to the gate. You can leave now and tell the king that Blackmore has survived worse than his displeasure. The boy fled. Corvus spoke quietly after he'd gone. 3 days, then we're officially rebels. So it seems. No regrets? Oh. Cadric thought about Alara organizing medical supplies that morning, her quiet competence transforming chaos into order. Thought about refugees who'd lost everything finding safety behind his walls. Thought about the choice between survival through submission or freedom through defiance. No regrets, he confirmed. That night, Cadric found Alara on the highest tower overlooking the sea. Wind whipped her hair around her face. She stood at the edge, staring at darkness and distant lights from villages that would probably turn hostile soon. You should be inside, he said, joining her. So should you. Can't sleep. Neither can I. Alara glanced at him. 3 days until the kingdom officially wants us dead. How are you so calm? Practice. At being wanted dead? At accepting consequences I can't control. Cadric leaned against the stone parapet. I learned early that fear doesn't change outcomes, just makes the waiting worse. That's bleak. That's survival. Alara was quiet for a moment, wind and waves filling the silence. Then, do you think we'll survive this? Honest question deserved honest answer. I don't know, Kadric admitted. The king has resources we can't match. Time works against us. Eventually supplies run out, people lose faith, walls crack. Siege warfare isn't about dramatic battles. It's about slow attrition until something breaks. Reassuring. You asked. I did. She turned to face him fully. And if we don't survive? If this fortress falls and the king executes us both? Then we'll have lived free for however long we had. Kedrick touched her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone. That's more than most people get. You're insane. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. But Alara leaned into his touch. I should have run. That night in the rain. I should have refused your hand and found my own way. Why didn't you? Because even drowning in mud, I knew you were the most dangerous and most honest thing I'd ever encountered. Her smile was sharp and sad, and I was tired of safe choices that left me powerless. So you chose danger instead. I chose you. Same thing, apparently. Here. Kaedric kissed her because words felt insufficient, because they might have days or hours or minutes before everything collapsed, because she'd chosen him despite every rational reason not to, and that meant more than all the political power he'd ever accumulated. They were still tangled together when Corvus's voice cut through the night. Your Grace, we have a problem. Kaedric broke the kiss reluctantly, turning to find his steward emerging from the tower stairs looking grim even by his standards. What kind of problem? Greaves is missing. Ice flooded Kedric's veins. Since when? No one's seen him since this morning. His chambers are empty. Documents are gone. And... Corvus hesitated. Say it. The emergency fund. The money he secured before the crown froze our assets. It's gone. Understanding crashed over Kaedric like a physical blow. Not missing, not kidnapped, gone. His chief solicitor, the man who'd served his family for 3 decades, who'd guided him through every legal battle, who'd known every secret and vulnerability. Greaves had stolen their siege fund and disappeared. Betrayal felt like drowning. Kedric forced himself to think past the shock. How much did he take? Everything we had liquid. Enough to fund the siege for 6 months. Without it, Corvus didn't finish. Didn't need to. Without money, they couldn't buy supplies. Couldn't pay guards. Couldn't sustain 400 people through extended siege. They were finished. When? Kadric's voice came out flat, dead. Best guess, he left sometime after dawn, took a horse from the stable. The gate guards thought he was running an errand. Corvus's jaw clenched. By now, he's probably at the capital, trading information for royal pardon. Alara spoke quietly. How much does he know? Everything. Defensive positions, supply caches, guard rotations, weak points in the fortress structure. 3 decades of accumulated intelligence about Blackmoor's operations. Greaves could hand the king a blueprint for destroying them. Enough, Kedric said simply. Can we survive without the money? Not for 6 months. Maybe 6 weeks with strict rationing. Less if the king moves quickly. He forced himself to calculate, even as betrayal tried to paralyze his thinking. We need to reduce population. Send away anyone who can't fight. That's over half our people, Corvus protested. I know. They came here for protection. We promised safety. And now I can't provide it. The words tasted like ash. Better they leave now, while they can still flee than stay and die when the walls fall. Alara's hand found his arm. There has to be another way. There isn't. Kedric pulled away, moving to the tower edge, staring at darkness that suddenly felt infinite. Greaves knew exactly what he was taking, exactly what it would cost us. This wasn't impulse. He planned this. Why? Alara's voice carried genuine confusion. He served your family for decades. Because I changed the calculation. Kadric's laugh was bitter. The old Duke Ashford was predictable. Ruthless, but rational. Someone Greaves could work with, profit from, understand. He turned back to face them. But then I chose you over strategy. Defied the king over logic. Became unpredictable. Dangerous in ways Greaves couldn't control or anticipate. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. He decided I was a bad investment. So he sold you out. He protected his interests. I would have done the same once. Kedrick felt something crack inside his chest. Not the betrayal itself, the recognition that his old self would have understood it, approved of it even. That version of him was gone. Killed by a woman kneeling in mud, and the impossible choice to care about something more than survival. Corvus interrupted his thoughts. Your Grace, we need to act quickly. If Greaves reaches the king before we can prepare, he's already reached him. Kedrick's mind was working again, processing implications. Greaves left this morning. That's 10 hours on horseback to the capital. He's been briefing the king for hours. Then we're out of time. Yes. Silence fell over the tower. Wind howled. Waves crashed below. 3 people facing the collapse of everything they'd tried to build. Alara spoke first. What do we do? Kedrick looked at her. At Corvus. At the fortress spreading below them, filled with people who'd trusted him to keep them safe. Every strategic calculation said the same thing. Surrender. Negotiate terms. Salvage what could be saved. But strategy had already cost him Greaves, had cost him allies, had reduced everything to cold logic that treated people like chess pieces. He was done with strategy. We fight, he said quietly. Corvus stared at him. Your Grace, without funding, we fight anyway. With what we have, for as long as we can. Kedrick's voice hardened. I'm not surrendering Alara to save myself. I'm not abandoning refugees to extend our supplies. I'm not becoming the monster they expect. That's suicide. That's choice. He turned to his steward. You can leave. Take whoever wants to go. No judgment, no consequences. But I'm staying, and I'm fighting until the walls fall or the king realizes it's easier to let us be. Corvus's expression cycled through shock, calculation, something that might have been respect. You've lost your mind. Completely. Good. The steward's thin smile was pure ice. I was worried you'd gone soft. Alara laughed, slightly hysterical. We're all insane. Probably. Kedrick pulled her close, one arm around her waist. But we're insane together. That counts for something. They stood on the tower watching darkness gather while the kingdom prepared to crush them. No money, no allies, no rational path to victory. Just 3 people who'd chosen defiance over survival and were about to pay the price. Below them, Blackmoor's lights flickered like dying stars. Above them, clouds gathered with the promise of storms. And somewhere in the capital, Greaves was probably counting his silver while the king planned their destruction. Kedrick felt the weight of betrayal settle into his bones. Not just Greaves abandoning him, but his own abandonment of everything he'd once believed. Power through control, safety through calculation, survival through ruthlessness. All of it gone, replaced by something more dangerous, more human, more likely to get him killed. Love that refused to kneel. Trust that demanded vulnerability. Hope that survived despite impossible odds. He'd spent his entire life armoring himself against this exact weakness. Building walls, maintaining distance, calculating costs before committing to anything. And now those walls were rubble. That distance was memory. And the only thing he was committed to was the woman shaking in his arms and the people sheltering in his fortress. Strategic disaster. Personal revolution. Worth it. The thought came with absolute certainty, even knowing what it cost, even facing annihilation. Worth it. 3 days, Corvus said quietly, until we're officially rebels. Then we have 3 days to prepare. Kedrick released Alara reluctantly. Gather everyone. I need to tell them what's coming. Give them the choice to leave. Most won't, Corvus predicted. I know, but they deserve the option. His steward nodded and disappeared down the tower stairs. Alara remained studying Kedrick with an expression that might have been fear or wonder or both. You really are going to die for this. Probably. For me. For us. For the choice to be something more than the monster they made me. Kedrick touched her face one more time. And yes, for you. I'm not worth this. You're worth everything. I'm not worth. He kissed her forehead. Even if we lose, even if the walls fall and the king executes us both, you're worth it. Alara's eyes glistened with tears she refused to shed. You're the worst and best thing that's ever happened to me. Same. They descended the tower together to face 400 people who'd bet their lives on the Iron Duke staying iron. Time to show them what happened when iron learned to bend and break and choose love over empire anyway. The assembly gathered in Blackmoor's great hall. Refugees and guards and servants crowded together while torches threw shadows across ancient stone. They looked terrified, hopeful, waiting for their duke to promise salvation. Cedric stood before them and destroyed that hope. He told them about Greaves, about the stolen money, about the king's ultimatum and the coming siege. He laid out their options with brutal honesty. Leave now and maybe survive. Stay and probably die. Simple choice. Terrible choice. The only choice that mattered. When he finished, silence crashed over the hall. Then a woman near the back spoke. "If we leave, where do we go?" "Anywhere but here," Cedric answered honestly. "The king's anger is focused on Blackmore. If you flee now, you might escape his attention. Might. No guarantees, just odds." Another voice. "And if we stay, then we fight together until we can't anymore." Cedric's gaze swept the crowd. "I won't lie to you. Our chances are terrible. We're outnumbered, outfunded, and outmaneuvered. But we're together, and that's worth something." A guard stepped forward. "We stay." "You don't know what We stay," the man repeated. "You took us in when other lords threw us out. You fed us, protected us, treated us like humans instead of tools." Other voices joined his. Agreement, commitment. People choosing defiance when survival said they should run. Cedric felt something crack in his chest again. Not breaking, opening. The walls he'd built collapsing under the weight of people who believed in something more than cold strategy. "Then we fight," he said quietly. "All of us. Until the end." The crowd erupted in fierce agreement. Elara found his hand in the chaos, squeezing tight. "You just convinced 400 people to die with you. I gave them a choice. That's worse." "I know." They stood together while Blackmore prepared for war. Not the calculated kind, the desperate kind. The kind where you threw strategy aside and simply refused to surrender. 3 days until official rebellion. Maybe weeks until the siege began. Hours until everything they'd built collapsed completely. But they were together, damaged, defiant, doomed. And somehow that felt more like living than anything Cedric had experienced in 35 years of survival. The Iron Duke was dead. Something more dangerous had taken his place. A man who'd learned that the only empire worth defending was the one you built with people you loved, even if that empire was nothing but crumbling walls and impossible hope. Let the king come, let the kingdom turn hostile, let the world burn. Cedric had finally found something worth more than power, and he'd fight until his last breath to keep it. The royal army arrived at dawn on the 4th day. Cedric watched from Blackmore's highest tower as 2,000 soldiers emerged from morning mist like a plague spreading across the northern plains. Infantry in formation, cavalry on the flanks, siege equipment rolling behind them with the inevitability of an approaching storm. Banners bearing the king's colors snapped in the wind, bright and clean and utterly confident. They looked like victory marching toward inevitable conclusion. Beside him, Corvus studied the army through a spyglass, his thin face betraying nothing. But Cedric noticed the tension in his steward's shoulders, the way his jaw clenched when he counted the siege towers. 2,000 trained soldiers against 400 refugees and guards. Mathematics didn't lie. This was execution dressed as warfare. "They brought everything," Corvus said quietly, lowering the glass. "Towers, rams, catapults. They're not planning negotiation." "No." Cedric's voice remained steady despite the ice flooding his veins. "They're planning annihilation. We could still surrender, save lives, and condemn Elara to whatever fate the king designed for her." Cedric's hands gripped the stone parapet hard enough to hurt. "No, we fight. Even knowing we'll lose? Especially then." Because that was the revelation that had crystallized during 3 sleepless nights preparing for this moment. Victory wasn't the point anymore. Survival wasn't the point. The point was choosing defiance when submission was easier. Choosing to stand when kneeling promised safety. Choosing love over empire even when empire held all the weapons. The old Duke Ashford would have calculated odds and surrendered strategically. That man was dead. Killed by a woman who'd held a knife to her own throat, rather than become a weapon against him. Worth it. The thought came with absolute certainty, even as he watched death march toward his gates. Worth it. Elara found him an hour later in the armory, methodically checking weapons with the same precision he'd once applied to political contracts. She wore leather riding gear instead of silk now, hair pulled back in a practical braid. War had stripped away the court's polished veneer, revealing the survivor beneath. Beautiful, dangerous, his. "They're setting up camp," she reported. Her voice steady despite the fear Kaedric could see in her smoke-gray eyes. "A mile out, beyond arrow range but close enough to remind us they're coming." Psychological warfare. Kaedric set down the sword he'd been inspecting. Standard siege tactics. Let the defenders stew in anticipation. Watch them unravel before the first arrow flies. Will it work? On some. He moved to the window overlooking the courtyard, where refugees drilled with weapons most had never held before. Women learning to load crossbows. Children too young to fight being taught escape routes. The elderly preparing medical supplies with hands that shook but didn't stop. Fear was everywhere, but so was determination. "They're terrified," Alara observed, following his gaze. "They should be. But they're not running." No? Something that might have been pride swelled in Kaedric's chest. They're not. Because fear alone didn't determine survival. Sometimes the difference between breaking and enduring came down to what you feared losing more than death itself. These people had already lost homes, families, positions. Blackmore represented their last stand against a kingdom that had discarded them. They'd fight because they had nothing left to lose. That made them more dangerous than any trained soldier who still believed retreat was an option. Alara moved closer, her hand finding his. "Kaedric." The sound of his name in her voice still hit like a physical blow. Intimate. Precious. The only person who used it instead of titles and formality. "I'm here," he said. "If this goes badly, it will. Let me finish." Her fingers tightened around his. "If we're going to die, I need you to know something." Kaedric turned to face her fully. In the armory's dim light, she looked small and fierce and absolutely unbreakable. The woman they'd thrown in the mud now stood in a fortress under siege, preparing to fight an army for the right to choose her own fate. Magnificent. "I love you," Alara said simply. "I didn't want to, didn't plan to. Spent weeks telling myself it was just survival instinct attaching to the nearest protection. But that's not what this is." She stepped closer, eliminating distance. "You saw me destroyed and pulled me from the wreckage. Not because you needed me, not because I served some purpose, because you couldn't leave me there." Her free hand touched his face. "And then you gave me everything. Freedom, respect, the choice to stand or run. You treated me like I was worth defending when everyone else decided I was worth destroying." Kaedric felt something crack in his chest. Not breaking, opening wider. "Alara." "So yes, I love you. And if we die today or tomorrow or whenever that army finally breaks through, I need you to know it wasn't wasted. None of it. Every moment since you pulled me from that mud has been the only time I've ever felt genuinely alive." She kissed him before he could respond. Desperate and certain and absolutely fearless despite the approaching army. When they broke apart, Kaedric found his voice had turned rough. "I love you too, though I'm still figuring out what that means." Oh boy, shays. Means you're human after all. Terrifying revelation. "You'll survive it." Alara's smile was sharp and sad. "Assuming you survive the siege." "Either way, I'm done pretending to be the Iron Duke." Kaedric pulled her close, breathing in her scent, memorizing this moment. "Whatever happens, I die as just Kaedric, a man who chose love over empire and refused to regret it. Romantic. Honest. Same thing for you." They stood together in the armory, holding each other while death assembled outside their walls. No strategy could save them now. No calculation changed the odds. Just two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate destructions, choosing to face annihilation together rather than survive apart. The mathematics of love defied logic. That was the point. Corvus interrupted 15 minutes later. "Your Grace, they're sending an envoy." Uskengi." Kaedric released Alara reluctantly. "Under flag of truce?" "Yes, demanding you meet them at the gate." "Demanding? Their word." Interesting. The king's forces were confident enough to issue demands before the siege even began. Either supreme arrogance or they knew something Kaedric didn't. Probably both. "I'll meet them," he decided. "Full guard. Show them we're not cowering." "Is that wise?" "Nothing about this is wise." Kaedric retrieved his sword, buckling it on with practiced efficiency. "But we're past wisdom. Now we're just making gestures." They assembled at the main gate, 20 guards in full armor flanking Kaedric while he stood at the center, deliberately exposed. Alara insisted on joining him despite his protests. Mrs. Thatcher appeared with a crossbow that looked comically oversized in her hands, but which she handled with disturbing competence. The gates opened. A single rider approached carrying a white banner, young, clean, wearing the king's colors like a shield against the fortress's hostility. He stopped 10 feet from the gate, close enough to speak without shouting, but far enough to retreat if violence erupted. "I bring word from His Majesty, the rider announced, voice cracking slightly. "Speak," Cadric commanded. The boy produced a sealed document, reading from it with the stiff formality of someone who'd memorized every word. "Duke Cadric Ashford, you are hereby charged with treason against the crown. Your titles are forfeit, your lands are seized, your life is forfeit, pending surrender and trial." Standard legal theater. The writer continued. "His Majesty offers final mercy. Surrender yourself and Lady Alara Thorne immediately. Face justice in the capital. Those sheltering in Blackmoor will be granted safe passage and immunity from prosecution." "And if I refuse?" Cadric asked, though he already knew. "Then the fortress will be taken by force. All inside will be considered traitors and treated accordingly. No quarter, no mercy. Total destruction." Silence fell over this gate. The rider's horse shifted nervously, sensing tension. Cadric studied the boy, seeing fear beneath formal presentation. The envoy didn't want to be here any more than Cadric wanted him here. Just another piece moved by powers neither of them controlled. Almost felt sorry for him. Almost. "Return to your commander," Cadric said clearly, voice carrying across the distance. "Tell him the Duke of Blackmoor refuses all terms. We will not surrender. We will not beg for mercy we know won't be granted. We will fight until the walls fall, or the king realizes we're not worth the cost." The rider's eyes widened. "Your Grace, that's what? Suicide, rebellion, insanity. I've heard all the words." Cadric's smile was cold and sharp. "Tell your commander that Blackmoor stands, and we'll show him exactly how expensive our annihilation will be. But the people inside, the refugees, they'll die for your pride. They'll die free." Cadric's voice hardened. "Which is more than they'd get from your king's mercy. Now leave, before I decide envoys aren't protected by flags of truce." The boy fled. Alara spoke quietly as the gates closed. "You just condemned 400 people to death. I gave them the choice. They chose to stay. That doesn't make their deaths less your responsibility." "I know." Cadric turned to face her. "But responsibility doesn't change the mathematics. Surrender means your death, and maybe their survival. Defiance means everyone dies, but we die standing. I chose defiance. For me, for us, for everyone inside these walls who's tired of kneeling to people who treat them like property." He gestured to the fortress spreading behind them. "These people aren't dying for my pride. They're dying because they'd rather burn than bow. That's their choice. I'm just honoring it." Alara stared at him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Then we make it count. Every second." The siege began an hour later, not with dramatic assault, with methodical preparation. The king's forces established perimeter camps, built siege towers out of arrow range, positioned catapults with engineering precision, every movement coordinated, professional, designed to demonstrate that Blackmoor's destruction was inevitable and organized, psychological warfare at its finest. Cadric watched from the walls, cataloging their approach with the same analytical detachment he'd once brought to political strategy. The enemy commander was competent, maybe brilliant. He wasn't rushing, wasn't giving Blackmoor opportunities to exploit through hasty mistakes, just slowly, inevitably, assembling the machinery of annihilation. "How long?" Corvus asked beside him. "Until they attack? 2 days. Maybe 3. They want us watching, waiting, unraveling." Cadric pointed to the siege towers. "See how they're building in full view? That's deliberate. They want us counting the ways we're going to die. It's working. Morale is cracking. Then we fix it." "How?" Cadric turned from the walls, moving toward the interior courtyard where refugees and guards gathered in anxious clusters. Fear hung over them like smoke. Understandable. They were watching their own execution being assembled. He needed to give them something stronger than fear. Hope was lies, but defiance was truth. Cadric climbed onto a supply wagon, making himself visible to the entire courtyard. Conversations died. 400 faces turned toward him, seeking reassurance he couldn't provide. So he gave them honesty instead. "You're all going to die," he said flatly. Gasps, shocked silence. Exactly the wrong thing to say by every leadership principle ever written. Exactly what they needed to hear. The king sent 2,000 soldiers to crush 400 refugees and guards, Kadric continued. The mathematics are clear. They will break through. The walls will fall. Most of you will not survive what comes next. He let that truth settle over them like a shroud. But before we die, we're going to teach that army why Blackmoor has stood for 300 years, why the northern territories don't break easily, why people who have nothing left to lose are more dangerous than any trained soldier who still believes retreat is an option. His voice rose, carrying across the courtyard. They think we'll panic, surrender, beg for mercy. They're wrong. We're going to make them bleed for every inch of ground. We're going to turn these walls into a nightmare they'll remember for generations. And when the historians write about the siege of Blackmoor, they won't talk about how we died. Kadric's smile was pure ice. They'll talk about how many we took with us. Silence held for 3 heartbeats. Then someone cheered. Then someone else. Then the entire courtyard erupted in fierce, defiant agreement. Not hope. Something harder. The grim determination of people who'd accepted death and decided to make it cost something. Alara found him after the crowd dispersed. That was either the best or worst speech I've ever heard. Did it work? They're sharpening weapons instead of crying. You tell me. Good enough. Kadric moved toward the armory again, his mind already calculating defensive positions. We need to organize rotations. Make sure everyone gets rest. Can't fight exhausted. Kadric. He stopped. We're really going to die here, aren't we? Honesty demanded acknowledgement. Probably. No dramatic last-minute rescue? No unexpected allies arriving to save us? This isn't a story. This is mathematics. He turned to face her. But we'll make them remember us. Is that enough? It has to be. The first attack came on the 3rd day. Kadric woke before dawn to bells ringing warning. He grabbed weapons by instinct, moving through Blackmoor's corridors while guards rushed to positions and refugees scrambled toward designated shelters. The walls were already lined with defenders when he arrived. Below them, the king's army advanced with military precision. Siege towers rolling forward on massive wheels. Soldiers behind shields. Archers positioned to provide covering fire. Professional assault by people who'd done this before. Kadric's mind processed tactics even as adrenaline flooded his system. They were testing defenses, probing for weak points. This wasn't the main assault, just reconnaissance with teeth. Archers, beach shisham, he shouted. Wait for my command. The siege towers crept closer, 50 yards, 40, 30. Now! Arrows erupted from Blackmoor's walls like a swarm. Most struck shields. Some found gaps. Men screamed. The advance wavered, but didn't break. Disciplined. The towers reached the walls. Ramps crashed down. Soldiers poured across. Chaos erupted. Kadric fought with the brutal efficiency of someone who'd trained for this his entire life. Sword moving through practiced patterns. Block, strike, kill, move to the next threat. No hesitation, no mercy. Just violence deployed with surgical precision. A soldier came at him with a spear. Kadric deflected, stepped inside the weapon's range, drove his blade through the man's throat. Blood sprayed across stone. The soldier collapsed. Another immediately took his place. And another. And another. The walls became a grinding meat engine. Soldiers surged forward. Defenders pushed them back. Blood made the stone slippery. Bodies piled at choke points. Screaming mixed with the clash of steel and the meaty sound of blades finding flesh. This was war stripped of glory. Just horror and survival, and the desperate mathematics of kill or be killed. Kadric lost track of time. Minutes blurred into hours. His arms burned. His lungs screamed. Blood covered him. Some his, most not. Didn't matter. Just kept fighting because stopping meant dying. Beside him, Corvus fought with the cold efficiency of a professional killer. Mrs. Thatcher reloaded crossbows with mechanical precision, each bolt finding a target. Guards who'd never seen real combat before held their positions through sheer stubborn courage. And somehow, impossibly, they held. The siege towers eventually withdrew. The assault broke. The king's forces retreated to their camps, leaving bodies scattered across the killing ground before Blackmoor's gates. Victory felt like drowning. Kadric stood on the blood-soaked walls, breathing hard, cataloging damage. 12 defenders dead, 23 wounded. The gates were damaged but holding. The walls had cracks but remained standing. They'd survived. For now. Elara found him during the aftermath, moving through the wounded with water and bandages. She looked exhausted, covered in other people's blood from helping with medical treatment, but her hand stayed steady. "Casualties?" he asked. 12 dead. 6 more might not make it through the night. Her voice remained clinical, detached, the only way to process horror without breaking. "We're running low on medical supplies." "How low?" 2 more assaults like this and we're out." Kedrick processed that information. 2 more assaults. Maybe a week if the King's commander stayed methodical. Less if he pushed aggressively. The mathematics kept getting worse. "The dead?" he asked quietly. "Corvus is organizing burial detail. We'll do it tonight, before they attack again." "Good." Kedrick moved toward her, ignoring his own wounds. "Are you hurt?" "Some bruises. Nothing serious." Elara looked up at him, and for the first time since the siege began, her composure cracked. "Kedrick, this is... I watch people die. Just children, some of them. Fighting because we told them to. I know. Does it get easier? No?" He pulled her close, not caring about blood or witnesses. "It just becomes familiar, which is worse." She trembled against him, not from fear, from the massive weight of what they'd survived and what was coming. "How many more times can we do this? Until we can't. That's not an answer. It's the only honest one I have." They stood together in the carnage while burial details moved among the bodies and wounded screamed for help that might not come. War had stripped away every pretense of civilization, revealing the brutal machinery underneath. This was what power actually looked like when you removed courtly performances and political theater. Blood, screaming, death delivered by mathematics too grim to ignore. The old Duke Ashford had wielded power through intimidation and strategy, never seeing the human cost of his decisions. This Duke Ashford stood in the wreckage he'd created and refused to look away. Different. Maybe not better, but honest. The second assault came 5 days later. This time they brought fire. Kedrick watched from the walls as catapults launched burning pitch over Blackmore's defenses. Some projectiles struck stone and died harmlessly. Others found wooden structures. The eastern barracks caught immediately, flames spreading with terrifying speed. Organized chaos erupted. Guards fought the fires while simultaneously defending against soldiers scaling the walls. Refugees formed bucket chains while arrows rained around them. Everything happening at once in a carefully orchestrated nightmare. The enemy commander was good. Too good. He was forcing Blackmore to split focus, dividing defenders between fire and combat. Classic siege tactic executed with brutal efficiency. Kedrick fought on 3 fronts simultaneously, organizing fire response, directing defensive positions, personally killing soldiers who breached the walls. His body moved on autopilot, decades of training taking over while his mind calculated impossible odds. They were losing, slowly, inevitably, but definitely losing. The fires consumed too much too quickly. Medical supplies burned, food stores went up in smoke. The structures that made Blackmore habitable crumbled under Flame's hunger. Even if they survived this assault, they'd lost the capacity for extended siege. Weeks had become days. Days would become hours. The assault finally broke at nightfall. The King's forces retreated again, but this time Kedrick saw confidence in their movements. They knew Blackmore was breaking, just a matter of time now. He found Corvus in the ruins of the eastern barracks, directing cleanup crews. His steward's face was blackened with smoke, one arm wrapped in bloody bandages. "Casualties?" Kedrick asked. 23 dead, 40 wounded. Most of our medical supplies are gone. Half our food stores destroyed. Corvus's voice remained flat. "Clinical. We can feed everyone for maybe 10 more days. Less if they keep burning supplies. 10 days. Then starvation." "And morale?" Kedrick asked, though he could guess. "Cracking. People are starting to question whether dying here is worth it." Corvus met his eyes. "They want to know if you have a plan." "I don't." "Then lie to them." "No." Kedrick looked at the burning ruins, the wounded being carried to overwhelmed medical stations, the exhausted defenders who'd fought 2 massive assaults and faced inevitable third. No more lies. They deserve truth. Truth will break them. Then they break. Kedrick's jaw clenched. "But they break knowing I respected them enough to be honest." Corvus stared at him for a long moment. "You really have changed. Is that bad? Ask me when we're dead." The steward walked away, leaving Caedric alone in the smoking ruins. Alara found him an hour later. She looked worse than after the first assault, exhausted beyond measure, covered in burns from fighting fires, one hand wrapped in bandages. "You're hurt," Caedric said, reaching for her. "It's nothing." She pulled away gently. "We need to talk." She pulled. The tone in her voice made ice flood his veins. "What happened?" "I've been talking to the refugees, the families, the people we convinced to stay." Alara's smoke-gray eyes met his without flinching. "They're dying, Caedric. Children. Elderly. People who trusted us to protect them. I know." "Do you?" Her voice cracked. "Because from here it looks like you're sacrificing them for your pride, for your refusal to kneel to the king." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "You think I want this? I think you've gotten so committed to defiance you can't see when defiance becomes suicide." Alara stepped closer, desperate now. "We could surrender, save lives. The king offered terms. The king offered my death and your imprisonment. That's not mercy. That's execution with paperwork. Maybe. But it's better than watching everyone here burn." Caedric felt something crack in his chest. Not anger, something worse. The realization that the woman he loved was right, and it didn't change anything. "If I surrender, you die," he said quietly. "Maybe slowly. Maybe in some convent where no one asks questions. But you die. And I can't. I won't. This isn't your choice alone anymore." Alara's hands found his coat, gripping tight. "You told them they could choose. They chose to stay. But that was before they understood what staying meant, before they watched their children die, before supplies burned and hope died." "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying give them another choice. Let anyone who wants to leave, leave. Negotiate safe passage for the non-combatants. The king won't honor it." "Maybe, but maybe some survive. That's better than certainty they all die here." Caedric wanted to argue, wanted to explain that surrender never worked, that the king would slaughter them anyway, that defiance was the only path that maintained any dignity. But Alara's eyes held such desperate hope that he couldn't destroy it with cold logic. "I'll send an envoy," he said finally. "Offer to release the non-combatants in exchange for safe passage. You will?" "Yes." Even knowing it was probably futile. "Because you're right. They deserve another choice." Alara collapsed against him, trembling. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The king probably won't accept." "But you'll try." "I'll try." They sent the envoy at dawn, a young guard carrying a white banner and a desperate offer. "Release the refugees. Spare the innocents. Let the king's anger focus on Caedric alone." The envoy returned 3 hours later, with his tongue cut out and a message carved into his chest. No terms, no mercy, total destruction. The king had made his position clear. Caedric stood in the courtyard staring at the mutilated guard while rage and despair warred in his chest. They'd tortured a man under flag of truce, violated every rule of civilized warfare. The message was clear. There would be no escape, no clemency, just slow annihilation. Alara saw the body and understood immediately. Her face went white, then determined. "We fight. Alara, we fight. All of us. Because you were right. Surrender just means dying on our knees instead of our feet." Her voice hardened to something that sounded like his own. "So we fight, and we make them pay for every life." Caedric felt something shift in his chest, seeing his own ruthlessness reflected in her eyes, understanding that he'd transformed her just as she'd transformed him. Different. Not better or worse. Just different. Together. The third assault came at midnight 3 days later. Caedric woke to bells and screaming, grabbed weapons, ran to the walls. The king's army hit them from all sides simultaneously. No more testing, no more probing, just overwhelming force deployed with single-minded brutality. Siege towers at every gate, ladders against every wall, soldiers pouring over defenses like a flood. Blackmoor's defenders fought with desperate fury. Caedric moved through the chaos, killing anyone who breached the inner walls. Beside him, Corvus and Mrs. Thatcher and Alara fought with the same grim determination. But there were too many. For every soldier they killed, 3 more appeared. The walls fell. The gates shattered. The king's forces pushed deeper into the fortress, methodical and unstoppable. Caedric's mind calculated even while fighting, they'd lost. The mathematics finally tipped past any possibility of survival. Time to retreat to the final position. "Fall back!" he roared. "Inner keep! Everyone to the inner keep!" Defenders retreated in organized chaos, carrying wounded, covering each other. The refugees who could still fight joined them. They barricaded themselves in Blackmoor's central tower, the fortress's last defensible position. 200 people crammed into a space meant for 50. Outside, the king's army assembled for final assault. Caedric stood at the tower's highest window beside Alara, watching 2,000 soldiers prepare to finish what they'd started. "This is it," Alara said quietly. "Yes." "Any last-minute miracles?" "No." "Then we make our stand here." She found his hand, fingers interlacing. "Together. Together." Below them, the king's army began their final advance, and then the unexpected happened. Horns sounded from beyond the battlefield. Not the king's horns. Something different, deeper. Everyone froze. From the northern road, an army appeared. 500 soldiers wearing colors Caedric recognized but couldn't believe. The Duke of Westmarch, the man who'd tried to destroy him at the ball, leading an army to Blackmoor. Caedric's mind reeled. This made no sense. Westmarch was Victoria's ally. He'd orchestrated the scandal at the ball. Why would he? Then he saw the second army emerging from the eastern approach. The Earl of Pemberton. Then more from the south. Lords who'd abandoned him. Nobles who'd declared neutrality. Houses he'd assumed were enemies. All arriving with soldiers. Not attacking Blackmoor. Attacking the king's forces. Chaos erupted across the battlefield. The king's army suddenly found itself surrounded, outnumbered, fighting on multiple fronts against an alliance that shouldn't exist. Corvus appeared at Caedric's shoulder, staring at the impossible scene. I don't know, Caedric admitted, but he intended to find out. The battle raged for 6 hours. Caedric and Blackmoor's defenders watched from their tower as the king's forces were systematically dismantled by the unexpected alliance. No quarter given. No mercy shown. By sunset, it was over. The king's army surrendered. And Duke Westmarch himself rode to Blackmoor's shattered gates carrying a white banner. Caedric descended to meet him, Alara and Corvus flanking him, trying to understand what game was being played. Westmarch dismounted, looking exhausted and grim. "Duke Ashford, you'll forgive me if I'm suspicious," Caedric said flatly. "You should be." Westmarch gestured to the battlefield. "But I'm not here as your enemy." "Then why are you here?" The older duke's expression twisted with something that looked like shame. "Because my daughter is dead. Suicide. 3 days ago." She left a letter explaining everything. Ice flooded Caedric's veins. Everything. How Victoria Thorne had blackmailed Lord Pembroke into participating in the scandal against Lady Alara. How my son-in-law's weakness destroyed her. How the King's Lord Chancellor orchestrated your assassination attempt. Westmarch's voice cracked. How this entire conspiracy went to the crown itself. He produced documents, letters, evidence. My daughter's death woke me from comfortable delusion, Westmarch continued. I started investigating. Found others who'd been threatened, blackmailed, forced into supporting the king's purge of anyone who challenged royal authority. We realized if we didn't stand together, we'd be destroyed separately. So you allied. Against a king who's become tyrant. Westmarch met Caedric's eyes. You stood alone against this. Refused to bow. Nearly died for it. That made you dangerous, but it also made you right. Silence fell over the shattered battlefield. Caedric processed this impossible shift. The king's overreach had created the very alliance that destroyed him. By trying to crush one rebellious duke, he'd terrified the entire nobility into unified resistance. Strategic disaster. Poetic justice. What happens now? Caedric asked. Now we march on the capital. Present the king with evidence of his crimes. Demand he abdicate or face removal. Westmarch's smile was cold. You started this rebellion, Duke Ashford. Want to help us finish it? Caedric looked at Alara, at the ruins of Blackmoor, at the bodies scattered across his land. The Iron Duke would have calculated advantages, negotiated terms, made alliance conditional on maximum benefit, but the Iron Duke was dead. Caedric Ashford, the man who'd chosen love over empire and survived against impossible odds, made a different choice. We finish it together, he said, and the kingdom trembled. The march to the capital took 6 days. Kedrick rode at the head of an army that shouldn't exist, watching the alliance of former enemies and reluctant allies spread across the northern road like a living testament to the king's miscalculation. 2,000 soldiers who'd survived the siege joined forces with the 3,000 who'd arrived to break it. An army built not from loyalty, but from shared terror of what happened when absolute power faced no resistance. Revolution born from survival instinct. The old Duke Ashford would have found poetry in the mathematics. Power consuming itself. Authority breeding the rebellion that destroyed it. All the careful political calculations he'd once mastered now inverted, showing him the blindness of believing control could be permanent. But the man riding this road wasn't that Duke anymore. He died somewhere between pulling Alara from the mud and watching Blackmore burn. What remained was something more dangerous and more human. Someone who'd learned that the only empire worth defending was the one built with people you'd die beside, even when the empire was nothing but smoking ruins and impossible hope. Alara rode beside him on a horse borrowed from Westmarch's forces. She looked different now, harder. The siege had stripped away softness, revealing someone who'd held a crossbow against trained soldiers and refused to break. War changed everyone it touched. The woman who'd knelt in the rain was gone. This one had watched children die defending walls and learned that survival demanded costs most people couldn't imagine. They hadn't spoken much since the battle ended. Too exhausted, too traumatized, too focused on the immediate necessities of organizing an army that had saved them but didn't trust them. But sometimes at night, when camp was made and guards were posted and the immediate dangers receded, Kaedric would find her hand in the darkness, and she'd squeeze back. And for a moment, the weight of everything they'd survived felt bearable. Connection forged in fire didn't require words. It just required presence. Westmarch rode up alongside them on the 4th day, his weathered face showing the strain of leading an army against his own king. The older duke had aged 10 years in the weeks since the ball. Grief and guilt made harsh sculptors. "The capital knows we're coming," he reported. "Scouts confirm the king is fortifying the palace, calling in loyalist forces, preparing for siege." "How many?" Kaedric asked. "Hard to say. Maybe 1,000. Maybe more." Westmarch's expression was grim. "He still has supporters. Nobles who benefit from his tyranny, merchants who profit from his corruption. They'll fight to preserve the system that feeds them. So we're marching into another siege. Looks that way." Yes. Kedrick processed this with the same cold calculation he'd once brought to all warfare. Except now the calculation included variables the old him had ignored: casualties, civilian deaths, the cost of victory measured in more than strategic advantage. "We need to offer terms," he said. Westmarch's eyebrows rose. "Terms? The king mutilated your envoy, tried to annihilate everyone you sheltered. And you want to offer terms? Gut soll das. I want to avoid destroying the capital to get to him." Kaedric's jaw clenched. "There are innocents in that city, people who had no part in this. If we lay siege, they starve alongside the guilty." "Since when do you care about collateral damage?" "Since I watched children die defending my walls," Kaedric thought, but didn't say. "Since I learned that power without conscience is just organized cruelty. Since a woman taught me that choosing to care, even when caring is dangerous, is the only thing that separates humans from monsters. Since I stopped being the Iron Duke," he said instead. Westmarch studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, we'll send an envoy. Offer the king a chance to abdicate peacefully. But when he refuses, and he will refuse, we finish this the hard way." "Agreed." They sent the envoy that evening, a respected earl carrying white banners and final terms. Abdicate the throne. Face trial for crimes against nobility. Accept exile rather than execution. Mercy the king didn't deserve but which Kaedric offered anyway, because someone had to break the cycle of violence begetting violence. The envoy returned 2 days later, with the king's response carved into his back. The message was simple, brutal, absolutely in character for a monarch who'd never faced real consequences. "Come and take it." Alara saw the mutilated envoy, and her face went cold, hard. She'd seen too much death to react with shock anymore. Just grim acceptance of what came next. "He wants war," she said quietly. "He'll get it." Kaedric's hand found his sword automatically, but on our terms. Minimal civilian casualties. Surgical strike at the palace. In and out before the city can mobilize. That's not how sieges work. Then we don't lay siege, we infiltrate. Corvus had appeared during the conversation, his thin face skeptical. Infiltrate a fortified palace filled with loyalist guards? That's suicide. So was holding Blackmore against 2,000 soldiers. We survived that. Barely. Barely still counts. Kedrick turned to his steward. The palace has weak points, service entrances, old tunnels. Every fortress does. We just need to find them. And then what? Walk in and arrest the king? Something like that. Corvus stared at him. You've completely lost your mind. Probably. Kedrick's smile was sharp and cold. But I'm done with conventional warfare. It costs too much. Kills too many people who don't deserve to die. So we do this precisely, quietly. End it before it can become another bloodbath. The steward looked at Alara. Talk sense into him. I think he's right, she said, surprising them both. You do. Siege means starvation. Starvation means dead civilians. Dead civilians mean we become exactly what we're fighting against. Alara's smoke-gray eyes met Kedrick's. Better to risk ourselves than guarantee innocent deaths. That's insane. That's growth, Kedrick corrected. We've all changed. Might as well change into something better than what we were. They spent 2 days planning. Corvus, despite his protests, proved invaluable at intelligence gathering. He found servants who'd fled the palace, merchants who delivered supplies, guards who'd deserted when the king's paranoia turned violent. Each one added pieces to a map of the palace's vulnerabilities. By the end of the second day, they had a plan. Insane, dangerous, likely to get everyone involved killed. Perfect. 50 soldiers, the absolute minimum force. All volunteers who understood they probably wouldn't survive. Led by Kedrick because he refused to ask anyone to take risks he wouldn't share. Alara insisted on joining. They argued about it for hours in the command tent, while Corvus and Westmarch watched with the resigned expressions of people who knew both participants were too stubborn to surrender. You're not trained for infiltration, Kedrick said for the 10th time. Neither are most of your volunteers. They're soldiers. I survived a siege, that counts. Alara crossed her arms. And before you say it's too dangerous, remember who held a knife to her own throat to save us both. That's exactly why you shouldn't come. You've already risked enough. So have you. Didn't stop you from volunteering for a suicide mission. That's different. How? Because... Kedrick stopped, searching for logic that didn't sound like hypocrisy. Because you love me and can't stand the thought of me dying, Alara finished quietly. I know. I feel the same way. Which is why I'm coming. Because if you die in that palace, I want to be there. Not waiting, not wondering. There. Kedrick wanted to argue. Wanted to command her to stay. Wanted to lock her somewhere safe where the king's violence couldn't touch her. But he'd spent months learning that the woman he loved didn't break when challenged. She just became more determined. If you die, I'm killing you, he said finally. Alara's smile was brief and fierce. Fair. They infiltrated the palace at midnight 3 days later. The old service tunnels proved exactly as vulnerable as Corvus's intelligence suggested. 50 soldiers moved through darkness with weapons muffled and armor abandoned for stealth. Every step calculated, every breath measured. This wasn't warfare. This was assassination wearing noble justification. Kedrick led from the front, Alara beside him, despite every instinct screaming to protect her. But protection meant control, and he'd learned that love without freedom was just possession wearing prettier names. So he let her walk into danger beside him. Trusted her to survive the same way she trusted him. The tunnels opened into the palace kitchens, empty at this hour except for a single guard who died before he could raise alarm. They moved deeper. 50 shadows flowing through corridors, Kedrick half remembered from childhood visits when his father had still been alive and the king had still been sane. Everything felt wrong. Too easy. Too quiet. Then they reached the throne room and understood why. The king waited. Not alone. Surrounded by 200 guards in full armor. The throne room had been transformed into a killing box. Archers positioned in galleries, soldiers blocking every exit, a trap sprung with mechanical precision. And in the center of it all, sitting on his throne like this was just another day of casual tyranny, the king himself. Older than Kedrick remembered, thinner, but his eyes held the same cold calculation that had made him dangerous before paranoia made him mad. Duke Ashford, the king said pleasantly, I've been expecting you. Kedrick's hand moved to his sword automatically. Beside him, Alara tensed. Behind them, 50 soldiers realized they'd walked into an execution.
Greaves told me everything, the king continued. Your plans, your infiltration route, the exact timing of your arrival. Really?
I should thank you for making this so convenient. All my problems assembled in one room, Bon. Betrayal upon betrayal. The solicitor had sold them twice, first to fund his escape, now to secure permanent favor with the crown. Rage flooded Kaedric's system, hot, blinding, the kind that made strategy impossible and violence inevitable. Then Alara's hand found his, squeezed, grounding. The rage didn't disappear, just became focused, controlled, useful. So what now? Kaedric asked, voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. You kill us all? Add 50 more bodies to your pile of crimes? Crimes? The king laughed. I'm the crown. I don't commit crimes. I exercise authority. There's a difference. Not when authority becomes tyranny, says the man who ruled the northern territories through fear and ruthless violence. The king leaned forward. Don't pretend moral superiority, Ashford. You built your power the same way I did, through intimidation, through destroying anyone who challenged you. We're the same. No. Kaedric's voice hardened. We were the same. Past tense, I changed. Changed into what? A sentimental fool who throws away an empire for a disgraced woman? Changed into someone who learned that empires built on fear eventually collapse under their own cruelty. Kaedric gestured to the assembled soldiers. Kaedric gestured to the Yet. You're so terrified of losing control, you fortified your own palace, turned the throne room into a prison, surrounded yourself with guards because you can't trust anyone without weapons forcing their compliance. The king's expression flickered. That's survival. That's slow death. You're so busy controlling everything you've stopped actually ruling, just reacting to threats, real or imagined, until everyone becomes a threat, and violence is your only response. And you think you're better? You led a rebellion, brought war to my kingdom. I stood alone when you tried to murder me for choosing love over politics. The rebellion you're facing came from your own overreach, your paranoia. Your inability to understand that power without legitimacy is just organized violence waiting to collapse. Silence fell over the throne room. 200 guards watched their king being verbally dismantled by a man surrounded and outnumbered. The mathematics said Kaedric should be begging for mercy. But mathematics didn't account for the weight of truth delivered without fear. The king stood slowly. You think speeches will save you? That these guards will suddenly switch sides because you made compelling arguments? No, I think they're already questioning whether dying for a paranoid tyrant is worth their salary. Kaedric's gaze swept the assembled soldiers. I think they're wondering if the king who mutilates envoys and attacks under flags of truce deserves their loyalty. Murmurs rippled through the guards. Not open rebellion, just uncertainty. The first crack in blind obedience. The king noticed. His hand moved toward the sword at his belt. Enough words, kill them. Kill them all. The guards didn't move. Not in defiance, just hesitation. The space between receiving an order and executing it where conscience lived. 1 second, 2, 3. Then a guard near the back lowered his weapon. Then another. Then a dozen. The king's face went purple. I said kill them. More weapons lowered. Not all. Maybe half. But enough to shift the mathematics from certain death to merely probable death. Enough to create an opening. Kaedric moved, not toward the king, toward the nearest exit, pulling Alara with him, his 50 soldiers following. A disciplined retreat through chaos while loyalist guards tried to intercept, and uncertain guards got in each other's way. Arrows flew, steel clashed, someone screamed. Kaedric blocked a sword thrust, killed the guard who'd swung it, kept moving. Alara stayed close, her own blade finding targets with disturbing competence. Behind them, soldiers fought and died buying seconds for the others to escape. They burst from the throne room into corridors filled with more guards rushing toward the noise. Kaedric led them deeper into the palace, away from obvious exits, toward the old royal quarters he remembered from childhood. If memory served, there was a passage, hidden behind a tapestry, leading to the gardens. He found it more through instinct than conscious memory, ripped the tapestry down, shoved the wall panel. It opened. 30 soldiers made it through before pursuit caught up. 20 didn't. Kaedric heard them fighting behind the closing panel, buying time with their lives. The mathematics of war were always brutal. The passage led to gardens as overgrown and forgotten as his memories suggested. They emerged into moonlight and running, crossing manicured lawns while shouts echoed from the palace behind them. The army waited beyond the gates. Westmarch's forces mobilized at the first sign of alarm. They rode hard toward the extraction point, covering distance while palace guards organized pursuit. By dawn, they'd put 10 miles between themselves and the capital. The infiltration had failed, but they'd survived. Barely. Cadric counted losses while riding. 20 soldiers dead buying their escape. Another 15 wounded. Their best chance at ending this quietly had collapsed because Greaves had sold them out for the second time. And the king remained on his throne. Westmarch found him during a brief rest stop. The older duke looked grim. That was a disaster. Yes, we lost good people. I know. And accomplished nothing except confirming the king knows our plans. Westmarch's jaw clenched. We need a new strategy. I'm open to suggestions. Conventional siege, starve them out. It'll take months and cost civilian lives, but it's our only remaining option. Kedrick wanted to argue, wanted to find some clever alternative that saved lives and achieved objectives simultaneously. But the mathematics didn't support it. They'd gambled on surgical precision and lost. Now only brutality remained. Unless an idea crystallized. Terrible. Risky. Built entirely on the crack he'd seen in the guards' loyalty. What if we don't attack? Cadric said slowly. What? What if we just wait, outside the capital? Visible. Patient. Let the king stew in his paranoia while his own guards question whether he deserves their protection. That's not strategy. That's hoping he collapses from internal pressure. Exactly. Cadric's mind worked through implications. We saw the guards hesitate. They're already questioning. If we give them time, let the king's paranoia turn on his own people, the throne room might implode without us lifting a sword. Or he purges the uncertain guards and fortifies with absolute loyalists. Possible, but I'm betting his paranoia is advanced enough that he sees threats everywhere, including people who've been loyal for years. Tyrants always eventually turn on their own supporters. Westmarch considered this. It's a gamble. Everything is. And while we wait, he could rally more support, bring in mercenaries, turn this into extended civil war. Also possible. Cadric met the older duke's eyes. But I'm tired of warfare that kills innocents to reach the guilty. If there's even a chance internal collapse works, it's worth trying. You really have changed. So I keep being told. Westmarch was quiet for a moment, then nodded. We'll try it your way. 3 weeks. If the king hasn't fallen by then, we lay siege. Agreed. Well, they made camp outside the capital's walls. Close enough to be threatening, far enough to avoid provoking immediate conflict. An army at rest but ready, patient but unafraid. Psychological warfare deployed with more precision than any siege engine. Days passed with agonizing slowness. Cadric spent them walking the camp, talking to soldiers, ensuring morale stayed stable during the waiting. It was different from commanding through intimidation. This required actually listening, actually caring whether people under his authority felt heard. The old Duke Ashford would have found it tedious. This version found it necessary. Elora worked beside him, her presence steadying in ways he couldn't articulate. She'd become something more than the woman he'd saved, more than the partner who'd survived siege alongside him. She'd become the mirror that reflected who he was becoming, someone better than he'd been, still flawed, still carrying scars, but genuinely trying to be more than the monster everyone expected. On the 9th day, palace guards began deserting, first in ones and twos, then in groups, all telling the same story. The king's paranoia had metastasized into violence against his own people. Guards executed for imagined disloyalty. Servants imprisoned for perceived slights. The palace transforming into a prison where everyone was suspect and violence was the only certainty. Tyranny consuming itself. By the 14th day, the desertions had become a flood. And on the 18th day, palace messengers arrived under white banners. The king was dead. Suicide, they claimed, though the knife wounds suggested something closer to assassination by people who'd finally had enough. The crown was vacant, the kingdom leaderless, and the nobility turned to the alliance that had held together through sheer determination to prevent absolute tyranny from becoming permanent. Westmarch called a council that evening.
Every lord and lady who joined the rebellion assembled in a tent that felt too small for the weight of what they were deciding. The throne is empty, Westmarch began without preamble. We need a king. Silence greeted this statement. Everyone understood what came next. Maneuvering for position, claiming legitimacy. The careful political theater that transformed military victory into lasting power. I nominate Duke Ashford, Westmarch continued. Shock rippled through the tent. Cadric felt it like a physical blow. What? You led this rebellion. You stood alone when the rest of us were too afraid. You changed tactics to minimize civilian deaths when conventional siege would have been easier. The people respect you. The soldiers follow you. And you've proven you can put principle above personal gain. No one who wants power should have it. Westmarch's expression was firm. That's the lesson we just learned. The king's hunger for absolute authority destroyed him. We need someone who will rule reluctantly, someone who understands power's limits. Other lords murmured agreement. Not all, but enough. Cadric's mind reeled. This wasn't the plan, wasn't what he'd fought for. He'd wanted to survive, to protect Alara, to stop the king's tyranny, not to become king himself. No, he said flatly. The tent fell silent. I appreciate the nomination, but no. I'm not fit to rule a kingdom. I'm barely fit to rule a fortress. Cadric gestured to Alara. Cadric, I spent months learning that the only empire worth defending is one built with people you love, not subjects you control. That doesn't scale to an entire kingdom. Then what do you suggest? Westmarch asked. A council, shared power, multiple voices instead of singular authority. Make it impossible for one person to accumulate enough control to become another tyrant. Cadric looked around the tent at nobles who'd spent their lives competing for advantage. We just destroyed absolute monarchy. Let's not rebuild it. That's chaos, someone protested. That's checks and balances. Cadric's voice hardened. Chaos is better than another paranoid king executing people for imagined threats. I'd rather navigate messy consensus than enforce clean tyranny. Debate erupted, fierce, passionate. The tent became a microcosm of everything the kingdom would need to resolve. Competing interests, different visions. The messy reality of trying to build something better from the rubble of what they'd destroyed. It took 3 days, but eventually consensus emerged. A ruling council. Shared power among regional lords. Checks and balances to prevent any single authority from accumulating too much control. Messy, imperfect, but better than the alternative. Cadric would serve on the council, as would Westmarch and several others. But no one would rule alone. Democracy wore many faces. This was just one of them. When it was finally settled, Cadric found Alara on the outskirts of camp, staring at the capital's walls. You turned down a crown, she said without looking at him. I did. Most people would have taken it. I'm not most people anymore. He joined her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You taught me that empires built on control eventually collapse. I'm not building another one. So what are you building? Something smaller, more honest? Cadric's hand found hers. A life with you. Away from courts and politics and the constant calculation of power dynamics. Maybe back to Blackmore. Maybe somewhere new, but together. Alara turned to face him, and in the moonlight, her smoke-gray eyes held something that looked like hope. You're serious? Completely. I've spent 36 years being the Iron Duke, learning to intimidate and control and destroy anyone who challenged me, and it left me alone in a fortress with nothing but enemies and fear for company. His hand cupped her face. Then you showed me there was another way, harder, more vulnerable, but infinitely more worth living. I just refused to break. You did more than that. You showed me that strength isn't about control. It's about choosing to care even when caring is dangerous. About building something with someone instead of just defending territory alone. Cadric's voice softened. I don't want to rule a kingdom. I want to build a life. With you. Whatever that looks like. Alara's eyes glistened. That's the most terrifying thing you've ever said to me. Because it's real? Yeah. Because I want it too, and wanting things has only ever led to losing them. Then we'll want carefully, build slowly, protect each other the way we've been doing since I pulled you from that mud. Cadric kissed her forehead. No guarantees, no certainties. Just us choosing each other every day and seeing what grows from that. That's not very strategic. No, but it's honest. He pulled her close. And I'm done with strategy. It costs too much. They stood together watching the Capitol's lights, while behind them, an alliance of former enemies argued about constitutions and governing principles. The kingdom was healing, slowly, messily, but healing. And the man who'd started the rebellion by refusing to kneel was walking away from the crown it had won him, different, not better or worse than what came before, just different, human, flawed and vulnerable and absolutely certain that love mattered more than empires. 3 months later, Blackmore's reconstruction was complete enough for habitation. Cadric stood in the rebuilt Great Hall, studying stone and timber that looked both familiar and foreign. The siege had destroyed much of the fortress, but the survivors had rebuilt. Different layout, better defenses, a structure that reflected lessons learned through blood and fire. Home looked different after you'd watched it burn. Everything did. Alara found him standing there, her approach silent as always. She wore simple clothes now, no silk, no jewels, just practical garments suited for someone rebuilding a life from wreckage. Corvus finished the eastern wing, she reported. Says we can move the refugee families in by week's end. Good, Cadric nodded. And the farms? Producing again. Not enough yet, but getting there. She moved to stand beside him. We'll survive the winter. We always do. Silence fell between them. Comfortable. Familiar. The kind that came from surviving impossible things together and learning that words weren't always necessary. Mrs. Thatcher appeared in the doorway, her severe face showing rare satisfaction. The council courier just arrived. They want to know if you'll attend the winter session. Tell them maybe, Kedrick said. Depends on whether Blackmore needs me here. I'll tell them yes with conditions, the housekeeper corrected. You made promises. Keep them. She departed before he could argue. Alara laughed quietly. She's terrifying. Always has been. Good thing she's on our side. Only reason we survived. Kedrick turned to face Alara fully. Have I told you today that I love you? No. You've been too busy arguing with stonemasons about wall thickness. Then I'm telling you now. I love you. More than is probably healthy. Definitely more than is strategically wise. Romantic. But her smile was genuine, soft in ways that still surprised him. I'm learning. You are. Alara moved closer, her hands finding his. And for what it's worth, I love you too. Even when you're being impossible about wall thickness. Walls are important. So is delegation. I'm working on that. They stood together in the rebuilt hall while outside Blackmore hummed with activity. Refugees who'd become residents. Survivors who'd become community. A fortress transforming from a weapon into a home. Different than what the old Duke Ashford had built. Better. That evening, Caedric climbed to the highest tower. Same view as before. Same violent gray sea. Same cliffs dropping away into darkness. But everything felt different when you'd learned that survival alone wasn't sufficient reason to live. Alara joined him as the sun set, painting the sky in colors that reminded him of fire and blood and all the things they'd survived. What are you thinking? She asked. That I spent 36 years building an empire of fear, and it took you kneeling in mud for me to realize empires aren't worth the cost. Bit dramatic. Bit true. Kedrick's arm went around her waist, pulling her close. I was the Iron Duke, ruthless, controlled, alone. And I thought that was strength. That armor protected me. It did protect you. Why? From everything except actually living. He kissed her temple. You shattered that armor just by refusing to stay broken. Showed me that vulnerability and strength aren't opposites. That love isn't weakness. That choosing to care, even when caring is dangerous, is the bravest thing anyone can do. Alara leaned into him. You're getting philosophical. I'm getting old. Oh, you're 36. Feel ancient. That's trauma. Probably. They watched the sunset in comfortable silence while the sea crashed below and the wind carried salt and the promise of storms that would come and pass and come again. Do you regret it? Alara asked quietly. Everything you gave up, the titles, the fear, the power. Caedric considered the question seriously. Thought about the old Duke Ashford who'd ruled through intimidation and died somewhere between the ball and the siege. Thought about everything he'd lost and gained. The empire traded for love, the control surrendered for connection. Not for a second, he said finally. I'd do it all again.
Every choice, every mistake, every moment. Even the parts where we almost died, especially those, they proved I was finally alive enough to be worth killing. Alara laughed, the sound carried away by wind. That's the darkest thing you've ever said to me. I'm a work in progress. Aren't we all? The sun dropped below the horizon, leaving them in twilight that softened everything. In that half-light, Kadric saw not what they'd been, but what they were becoming. Two people damaged by the world who'd found each other in wreckage and decided to build something new from the ruins. Not perfect, not healed, but genuinely, messily, impossibly alive. What happens now? Alara asked. Now we rebuild, help the refugees, serve on the council when necessary, figure out what life looks like when you're not constantly fighting for survival. Sounds boring. Probably terrifying. Kadric's smile was soft and genuine. But we'll be terrified together. I suppose that's something. It's everything. They descended from the tower as stars emerged overhead. Below them, Blackmoor's lights flickered to life. Families sharing meals, guards laughing over cards. The quiet domesticity of people learning to live instead of just survive. The Iron Duke was dead. Long dead. Buried somewhere in the mud and rain and blood of revolution. What remained was just Kadric, a man who'd learned that true strength wasn't domination but the courage to be vulnerable, that empires built on fear crumbled, while relationships built on choice endured. That love, messy and dangerous and absolutely worth it, mattered more than any crown. He'd spent 3 decades becoming a monster, spent 3 months learning to be human again. The mathematics suggested humanity was harder, but infinitely more worth the cost. Alara's hand found his in the darkness, squeezed, a silent affirmation that echoed louder than any speech. We survived. We changed. We chose each other. Everything else was just details. The kingdom would heal or it wouldn't. The council would succeed or collapse. The future remained uncertain and fraught with dangers neither of them could predict. But they'd face it together. Not as Duke and rescued woman, not as powerful and powerless. Just as two people who'd been destroyed by the world and rebuilt each other from the wreckage, learning that the only empire worth defending was the one measured in moments of genuine connection rather than territories controlled. Power had taught him to survive. Love had taught him to live. The difference was everything. And as Blackmoor settled into evening routines and the sea whispered promises of storms weathered and storms coming and the endless cycle of destruction and renewal that defined existence, Kadric Ashford understood something fundamental. He'd finally found what he'd been searching for his entire life without knowing he was searching. Not power, not fear, not control, just home. And the courage to defend it not with armies, but with the daily choice to show up, be vulnerable, and build something worth more than all the empires he'd abandoned. The Iron Duke was dead. Long live the man who'd learned that loving someone completely was the most dangerous and most worthwhile thing he'd ever done. And he'd die defending it. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Every single day, together.